Bothell City Council is now in session. Could you please rise and join me in the flag salute? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Welcome, everybody. Bothell City Council is now in session. All members are present and accounted for, except for Mayor Freed and Councilmember Agnew, who are both absent and excused. Anybody? Next up, we have our meeting agenda approval. Any changes or additions? Councilmember Sandberg.
I'd like to add 10 minutes to the discussion regarding the request for storage space for the Veterans Heritage Museum.
Is everybody okay with that? All right, we'll add 10 minutes to that. Any other additions or Councilmember Lamb?
I had a question. Do we have an executive session tonight?
My understanding is we do not have an executive session. So, anybody else? All right. Then that will move us to committee reports. Councilmember Sandberg.
It's not exactly a committee report, but I thought it was pretty interesting. I attended a board retreat, I guess, today for the North Shore School District board members, and they had an attorney there answering their questions and advising them about the Open Public Meetings Act. And I thought it was really interesting. They talked a lot of things that we've already discussed, but they spent a lot of their time talking about social media and requirements of the OPMA and the Public Records Act. And I just felt it was really timely, and there were a lot of pearls in there because we probably all, but I get a lot of pressure from the community to participate more in social media. And I've been reluctant to do so. And so, for example, there is a Bothell community Facebook page, and there are other Facebook pages. And their attorney was making the point that you have to be very careful as an elected official for them, you know, the board members, for us, council members, about your participation in those types of social media settings, because if multiple members of city council were, for example, members of a forum, of a Facebook forum, and then one council member started to make a comment, and then there became a back and forth on that Facebook page, that could constitute an open public, an OPMA violation. He said, you know, you can, as council members, you can all subscribe to something like you would subscribe to the newspaper. Everybody subscribes to the newspaper, and as long as it's passive, that's okay. But whenever becomes any kind of two-way discussion, you just have to be really careful. And he went on to say it's really just best to err on the side of caution and to not post at all, to be even really careful about liking posts, because liking a post might constitute you know, an advocacy for a particular position or voting for a particular position. So I thought that you know, maybe we might want to have a discussion about that in the future, and how you know, as the city, we can have maybe a more coordinated effort in terms of communicating official city business, because I know a lot of us like to be able to communicate with our constituency, and this feels like you know, really impacting that ability to communicate, and yet we don't want to violate OPMA. We don't want to subject the city to additional liability for public records storage and retrieval. So, for example, if I had a Facebook page and I posted out city information, then it would be incumbent upon the city, at least my understanding, is for them to keep a record of my Facebook page. So I don't know if the city attorney, if we wanted to have another discussion about that. They referenced a white paper from the Freedom Foundation, which is out of Olympia, which may be useful for staff to disseminate to
I was going to ask, do they have handouts that the board members receive that maybe the city manager or the city attorney could reach out and get copies of those and kind of vet through them to see what's applicable to us?
Right. Because, I mean, if we want to be in contact with our constituency, but we don't want to violate laws, and even just being a passive member on a Facebook discussion group might imply to the members of that group that, or an expectation of us to respond. And when we don't respond, we don't want to give the impression that we're not interested in the concern or we don't know the answer. It's probably inappropriate for us to be responding. And so anyway, it might be an opportunity to also think about how the city, through our public information officer, can disseminate all of that official information. Anyway, I thought it was really interesting, and I'm not very big on social media, and now I have an excuse to not be.
I don't, for other reasons, I don't do it that under advice of an attorney. But Councilmember Lamb, you had a comment?
So, I appreciate that, and that's an interesting observation about social media. I think that there's kind of two distinct issues that are going on, and sometimes they relate, and sometimes they don't. And I guess I'd ask the city attorney to clarify this. For an Open Public Meetings Act violation has to do with a quorum of council members, which is more than, in this case, it would be 4 or more, participating in a back and forth. And I would agree with the suggestion that if 4 or more members of a council are having a dialogue on a social media site, that could very well constitute a violation of the Open Public Meetings Act. A single member of the council opining on a social media site, by definition, could never be a violation of the Open Public Meetings Act because they're not meeting with anybody else unless that was being used to construe something else or being construed as a violative of a way to try and get around that. Is that correct?
Your understanding is basically correct, and it's the same thing that we've said over the years, and I've made this point with other electronic media. It's the same thing. If when we send out an email with information, we can send that out as staff to all council members. What we don't do is invite a bunch of group responses from council, because that then can begin a meeting that's in violation of the OPMA. It's the same thing on social media. It's just a different electronic format. So yeah, we have to avoid that quorum of conversation, whether it's in a phone call, by on an email, or on social media of some type, Facebook or whatever.
And the same issue then applies in terms of the akin of a social media post is the equivalent, at least in an open site, of writing a letter to the editor or of penning an op-ed piece for a paper. It could potentially, I guess, be an OPMA issue if multiple people commented on that below, or you had some sort of back and forth dialogue. But in and of on its face, a single member posting is never a violation of the OPMA. The other issue then has to do with what is a public record when you're conducting city business. And I think the idea is, if you're making a post that is communicating a city position, it would be incumbent to retain that post or have some record of that post, so that if somebody requested it, that you would be able to transmit it to them. And so I think when people post, it's not that you can't post. I mean, obviously, everybody has their own preferences. You can or cannot post on social media as you see fit. But the issue is, do you have the ability, if somebody requests that, to transmit it? And that is that correct?
Yeah, and this is a good opportunity to remind council that whatever business you do, in whatever form you do it, you need to be able to recover it. You need to be able to provide it as a public record. That's why we strongly discourage the use of text messaging for council, any kind of city-related business. Because there's just currently we don't have a system in place to track that. So we have a policy: we don't use text messaging for city business, except in extreme emergency situations, and then we take steps to maintain those records. And so that's a good point. And social media, I don't know how you would keep a copy of that. You could do a screen print, but then we have obligations to keep things in electronic format. So you don't have it in electronic format. You just have a screen print. So it becomes difficult at that point. So there are some things. Those are issues that will get solved in the near future, I'm sure, with technology. But for right now, we don't have all the answers to records retrieval that we need to have on some of these formats. One thing I would like to add, we have an obligation under state law to provide some training to council on these issues, and we will be doing that as time goes by in compliance with the law. So there will be some trainings that will occur for new council members and for council members when they're reelected, and maybe more often if council agrees to be part of that as a whole. So.
And then the last issue that I wanted to raise with you, and this is because the details of it were in executive session, I can't go into that, but communication via email accounts that are not city email accounts by members of the public about city business, that is something where then the city has a right to go to say, if you're using an email server, a private email server, to communicate with somebody about city business, I'm presuming then the city has the ability to reach into that server or direct the city council member to reach into that server to provide that record.
Well, there is certainly an obligation that has been clarified by the court recently with the prosecutor in Pierce County in the case that he has been involved with. But yes, we have an obligation as the city to provide records regarding city business. That becomes a difficulty when an individual uses their private email for that purposes. And some cities in the past have said, well, if it's private email, we have no way of recovering it, so we're not providing it. The court has clarified that they're not going to take that as an answer. In fact, they ordered the city to provide it, or the county to provide it in the case I'm referring to, and they also ordered the individual involved. So now the individual is under a court order to provide those records. And so you can expect that, and I've been saying this ever since I started here, and it's just become more and more clear under the court's rulings that you need to be prepared if you're using private devices for city business. You need to be prepared to disclose city records, anything related to city business on those private devices. And so it's better to use public accounts and public devices to do your business on.
Great. Thanks for that clarification.
All right. Thank you for bringing that up. And again, I hope that we can get the city attorney or city manager to reach out to the school district and get a copy of the handouts and see what may be pertinent for us. All right. Moving on, we are now into our study session. We have AB 15-122, our Storm and Surface Water Master Plan. We have 30 minutes assigned to this, so
Thank you. Good evening, Council. I'm Craig Stamper with the Public Works Department, and here to present your first look at the Storm and Surface Water Master Plan update. As I go through this relatively brief presentation, feel free to interrupt me at any point or any questions. I'll kind of try to keep my eye on you. But the purpose of this study session, or what we're going to do in the study session, is overview just a little bit the purpose of the utility itself and the structure, and then present the 5 chapters of the Surface Water Master Plan, mention our next steps in the process, and receive your comments. So the purpose of our storm and surface water utility bears some weight in how we prepare our master plan. We control and manage the surface and storm water of the city, and there's an important distinction there between the two. For 3 things: we minimize the impacts of storm runoff on private properties and people and public properties. The second is we control the pollution from the stormwater to maintain and improve water quality.
Can you hear me better now? I thought I was loud enough. And we also protect and preserve and participate in the restoration of aquatic resources, along with other departments in the city and regional agencies. Actually, I'm going to back up for just 1 second. I want to show you the functional areas of the utility because they're outlined in the report. But this graphic shows the kind of the areas where we function, and systems management at the top. That is the management of our pipes, our ponds, our streams, rivers, creeks, and all the whole system of the city. And That's a fairly important function that we have. We also provide regulatory compliance, pollution control, system expansion, which is done through developers. That was a little bit off your graphic, sorry, but that's mostly done through developers in the city, but we participate in regulating that. We have financial management of the utility and record keeping and reporting. So those are the functional areas, and those are discussed in detail in the master plan update. We have a fair amount of infrastructure that and natural systems that we maintain, almost 52 miles of streams and rivers, and almost 288 miles of public and private pipe, and a fair amount of infrastructure, again, in the table in the report that you'll find. So this master plan, this is a business plan, strategic plan, financial plan, action plan, but think of it as a roadmap. It does not specifically make a bunch of decisions. There will be a number of decisions that the City Council will get and have been making all along in the process here, and I've listed these here. Some of the areas that you'll be making formal decisions are on rate setting, how we collect our bills, how much our bills are, our budget approvals for the utility and where we spend our money. The capital program, the projects that we do, you'll see that all with the capital planning and with the budget itself. And then the code changes again on the bottom. Those are all decision points that you're going to have along the way. This master plan update provides the roadmap, but again, doesn't make those specific decisions. Those will be before you again. So the organization of the master plan, it's in 5 sections. The first section is the program overview and evaluation. I'll go through each of these briefly. There's a section on projects. I've specifically not used the word capital projects because they're capital and natural environment projects. Watershed management, financial management, and then an important section, the action items, which puts a lot of those together into a timeline and a table as to what we're going to do when. And then there are appendices with more details in there. So the first section is a program overview. And in this section, we take a circumspect look at the utility and the functions that we have. This has a gap analysis of where we need to be doing certain things. That first sentence is fairly important. There isn't any major restructuring of the utility that this master plan recommends. We know regulations are going to become more complex, more expensive, and detailed, particularly through the EPA and the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, but also city regulations as well. So we recognize that, but unlike the last master plan where we were faced with a bunch of increasing environmental regulations in a significant way, this one doesn't have any major restructuring. There are a number of items that we'll be dealing with that are tied to the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, or NPDES. Low impact development, which you've dealt with in some cases, illicit discharge, and then our stormwater design manual. And then there are a bunch of things that are not under that umbrella that we do. The projects that we do, maintenance and asset management system, and a big one there, the water quality action plan. That's another one that it's related to NPDES, but it's something that was last done in 1996. And it's time to update that, in our opinion. Rate reviews. And then the very last item on here, if you can see it, is a baseline staff and equipment needs analysis. This is looking out many years to make sure that we are keeping our staffing level and our equipment level at an appropriate amount for to manage our rates. Action items, again, are discussed in Section 5. Section 2 deals with projects. In this case, we know that we're going to be focusing on other projects once the downtown area, the major projects that we're spending a fair amount of effort on right now, are complete. But it presents a balanced list of both natural and built environment stormwater projects. We went through a fairly systematic approach to identify, make sure we've captured most all the projects that we do. Undoubtedly, more will come in as we find out more problems or more issues. We've added a facilities retrofit. This is the stormwater treatment and detention facilities around town that provide opportunities to retrofit them to improve water quality, reduce flooding, and just provide a better system. And we've also know we need to focus some effort on our system replacement. We put roughly $430,000 a year. We take that out as depreciation in our utility. So there's a fair amount of money. That money is to fund the replacement of our aging infrastructure so that we don't have failures and not have the money in the future. So that we know we need to program that through asset management systems. The third section is on watershed management. And in this, the takeaways here, the water quality, despite our efforts, we're seeing a decline still in water quality and stream health. Now, whether we're leveling off that decline with our efforts or exactly how much impact we're having is not certain. But we know we need to take that to the next step, and that is we need to have some fairly defined action items for water quality. So a water quality action plan is an important step in this. We did watershed evaluations a little bit differently in this plan, organized them by surface water management areas. The graphic here that I'm going to click on, this is our small stream basins that we have throughout the city, and then also the testing locations that we have. And you see there's roughly 25 different little basins around the city. So to manage at that level, we do some management at that level. But we've organized some of this plan into watershed action, or watershed stormwater management action areas, or areas here, and we've divided it up into 11 areas. And I can discuss this more if you're interested in this, but it provides us an ability to focus some of our activities in these areas a little bit differently. It's one of the tools that we have in watershed management that's addressed in this plan. And we've characterized each of those areas in the back of the plan. The fourth section is on our financial picture. And the basic takeaway here is we think with where we are now, things will be fairly steady once we get over this hump of projects. But we do know that there are going to be some rate increases and some other things that are necessary. There's a table in the plan that you can find a lot of our financials, a lot of numbers on this, and I apologize for that. But what you see is that in 2014, 15, 16, this is our projects, and $6 million a year average. It's mostly in the downtown area, and then it levels off in future years. That's funded through our bond proceeds and downtown facilities charges, but still it gets us down to a point where our cash flow drops down a fair amount, and then it gets better in future years, assuming we have a reasonable rate increase, which will be coming in front of you fairly soon in the next month. So this shows that we would then have a building balance, but most of that is for asset replacement. At 400 and something thousand a year, it's about $3 million of that 4.8 would be for asset replacement. Any questions on that? Okay, I'm going to move into our next section, and that is the action items. So we've divided these up into critical, high, and medium. Critical is like mission critical. We need to be doing those to keep our utility fully functional. And high is items that we really should be doing as a utility and that provide a lot of benefits. So there's a table in the graphics that shows a timeline for when these items would happen and could happen. So we've programmed them that way. Probably seen that. And then I'll go through each of them really quick. And just the critical and high. I won't really cover the medium. 5 critical items: completing our planned projects, again, to protect the built and natural environment. Screening the city for NPDES. In parentheses are sort of where either the council decisions are or whether this is a permit requirement. There's nothing in the permit that says we have to do number 1, but we know that we need to do that, our projects. And you, the council, will make decisions with the capital plan approval and the budget approval. But we need to screen our city for illicit discharges and connections. We need to revise our code for low-impact development, or LID. That's a permit requirement. And we need to update our stormwater design manual. That's a permit requirement. And the Bothell Municipal Code is where you'll adopt those. And then reviewing and updating our rates. Not a permit requirement exactly, but it's something that obviously we need to do. So those are our critical items. High priority, we've listed 10 in here. I'll briefly go through them. Reviewing our rate structure and billing. The next year we're going to take a look at that and present that to you. Implementing our asset management program and maintenance management program. I think I mentioned that one. Assessing our long-term staffing needs is an important item. These are all, again, going to come in front of you with budget. Developing a water quality action plan. And then the 5th one, reviewing private facilities maintenance. This is an area we keep getting hung up on in the utility, having to deal with a variety of different approaches to private facilities operations and maintenance. And facilities are water quality control, ponds and vaults and things like that. IDing small projects, so we know there's some places where we can, some low-hanging fruit where we can make an impact on water quality. Developing a retrofit plan for our facilities, I mentioned that one. We play a role in emergency planning and critical areas planning in the city, and we need to clarify our role in that with the other agencies in the city. And then finally, developing these surface water management strategies. So those are our main items. Again, there are 10, I won't go through these minor priority items, but if you have any questions about them, we'd be happy to answer them. Our next steps, so we'll get your input tonight, finish up whatever changes to the plan we can, if they're not significant, by the end of the month, so the public has a chance to look at the plan, and then it'll be a public hearing to consider the draft plan on the 20th of October, and then from there we'll revise the plan based on any comments and input at that point for a final adoption public hearing in November.
So, Craig,
Yep.
and in the excuse me, in the staff report or in the agenda bill, it says that we'll have a public hearing on the 15th.
That must not have been corrected. It was supposed to be. It's supposed to be the 20th of October. I
Okay,
think.
so we'll have another study session or a couple before then. Okay.
Well, you can if you wish, certainly. The intent was to have a public hearing at that point, but there isn't another study session planned.
But no public hearing on September 15th.
That's correct.
Okay. All right. Any questions of staff? Councilmember Lamb.
Thanks so much for the presentation and for your report. A project that I get a lot of questions about from the public is 120th, the Park Creek improvements. And I have to say, in reviewing this, it doesn't seem like our response is adequate, because this is a problem that's persisted for over a decade with sort of habitual flooding of that road. The road is completely sunken on one side now. One lane is almost unusable. One lane is unusable for a good portion of this road as it becomes 39th in Snohomish County. Mm-hmm. And essentially we're allocating just $75,000, it seems like, for a study, and $75,000 for some drainage improvements. And then we're going to apply for some grants to have $500,000 constructed. As I look at some of these other projects, it says that, like, the metal pipe culvert crossing for Perry Creek is undersized and corroded. I mean, that may be the case, but this is one that really affects, I think, public safety, and it affects an asset. We've had a lot of conversation about how much it costs when our roads deteriorate. Mm-hmm. We're already spending money on those roads because they're deteriorating, and because we've had to resurface them. We're going to have to resurface them again because of this damage. Why isn't this project a higher priority?
It actually is our number one priority. The issue, though, is that the primary reason that there is flooding for 120th is due to the creek that is actually on private property. The settling of the roadway is due to an underlying peat bed, which is really kind of outside of the purview of the surface water utility. But the creek, which flows from it silts in on the private property and then flows over the sidewalk into the gutter. So the solution is all on private property as well. So the utility, it's a number one priority, but we do not ascribe a lot of public money toward the solution, but we certainly are working with the property owners to come up with a solution, and we've helped by applying for a grant, which hopefully we'll hear some fairly soon on, to assist the property owner.
How many years have we been working with a private property owner on this?
I think it's before my time, because I've been here for a little over a year, and I've been working with them since then, but it's a couple of years there's been an agreement to work together to try to solve the problem, but it's... Yeah.
So I guess that's something that I'd like to talk about in executive session if it's appropriate. City Attorney, or if you think we can ask, or if we can have an honest, or not honest, but an open dialogue about it here. All of our conversations are honest.
There are legal ramifications, certainly potential litigation. We hope not, but obviously there's always the potential for litigation. So some of the strategies that we're working on, and it would probably be best to discuss in executive session. That's not something we're prepared to do tonight, because we would need to provide a little bit more background than I'm prepared to discuss tonight.
That's completely fair. So I guess I'll bracket that issue and come back to it. And then you had said that the other issue of the road settling is just because the road is built on poor material, on peat moss, essentially, or?
To my knowledge, I wasn't here when the road was constructed, but I've seen.
I don't think I was
photos.
here either when the road was
There's
constructed.
There's peat underneath, peat bog, an old peat bog, ancient peat bog underneath there, and that creates complications for keeping the road from settling.
And is that for the entirety of the road, or is it just for the
It
portion?
varies, like soils do in various areas, so you're going to see settlement in different rates at different places.
Okay. So you're saying that essentially the holdup on this right now, and I don't want to go too far afield if we're in executive session, is that the source of the problem is on a private property owner. We're in conversations with the property owner, which the details of which we'll get into later, and we've applied for a grant which would provide somebody else's money to kind of fix the problem that originates on the private property owner's property. But until that happens, and until we have that person's consent, we're not able to do anything
There's limited things that we can do.
outside of the conversation that we would have in executive session.
And if you notice, the roadways, the lane has been open for quite some time now because we temporarily held the water back with a sandbag dam along the back of sidewalk.
I drive that road at least twice a day, every day. So I've seen I've seen the evolution, and actually it is better than.
Partly because it's been dry.
Yeah, it's partly because it's been dry too, and I mean the problem is when we had our first rain, it filled up, that lane filled up almost immediately again. So.
Yeah, the sandbags, the siltation has come up out to the sandbags now, and so now it's going to flow over until and unless we either raise them or have the property owner remove the silt, or and it's a creek, so there are complications.
Yeah, and I totally understand, and I appreciate, and my question and my sense of urgency about this is in no way reflective of us, especially given the background that you gave tonight. It's in no way reflective of staff not doing enough. I just think this is one of those projects that when people look at, it's just kind of one of those problems that seems to not go anywhere, and it seems to just kind of hang around. And I think when we're talking about asking people, for taxes, to invest in public infrastructure, to improve our roads, when we have this kind of open sore, if you will, that isn't being healed and isn't being addressed, I think people are like, well, why would we put more money into a system that isn't at its present addressing that? The background that you provided in terms of the source being on the private property owner is something that I suspected and brought up some time ago, and I'm glad to know that that's the case, and I look forward to discussing that when our staff has the time that I'm sure they'll need to brief and prepare that. But thanks for the rest of your presentation.
Councilmember Evans.
Yes, I had a similar question along that line. In general, how do we correct private property problems or violations? And then the report refers to the chart to correct illicit discharge issues. And I appreciate the conversation that Councilmember Lamb's had and your response and things, but I don't know, it just seems like the public sees these problems and they go on and we get the phone calls and issues and things. And so I don't know, if there's a way to put more teeth in some of our enforcement of those things or whatever, but that is a frustration. And I notice that there's issues in here on private properties and those types of things. And so how can we be more forceful in dealing with those?
That's a good question and a tough question. It involves there's sort of two things to think about when I consider this. And first is that private property owners with private stormwater facilities often and almost universally tend to have a feeling that it's a city problem, not a private problem. And even though developers, when they built the infrastructure in the first place, got permits and agreed to build them, got permission to build them and agreed to maintain them, subsequent owners don't don't always see it the way the developer and the city saw it or the county saw it when things were first constructed. So you're fighting an uphill battle, especially with stormwater facilities, because of that, because of this thought process that people have that this is a city problem, it's not my problem, I shouldn't have to fix it. Not only city shouldn't you come fix it, but I certainly shouldn't have to pay to fix it. So we're fighting that battle. Which is unique compared to other code enforcement situations. Then with just code enforcement in general, it's a matter of how heavy-handed does the city want to be. How we never want to be heavy-handed, but at some point it takes litigation to enforce these code enforcement actions, and so that involves money and staff time and effort. And so it really comes down to an issue of how much staff time and how much money do we want to commit to code enforcement, not just in this area, but in other areas as well. And, we try to follow council's lead on that and spend the time and the budget that we have to do that sort of thing. And it's something we're constantly evaluating. And, the course correction, though, would be spend more staff time and more money on those efforts, which involve litigation and attorneys and that sort of thing.
Go ahead.
I noticed in here that our plan only covers the current city limits. It does not go into our urban growth areas.
Correct.
And as I was reading through the plan and some of the discussions we've had in the past, in many cases, we are such a small piece of the overall pie of
Yes.
where the water is coming from and that type of thing. What are we doing to coordinate on a regional basis on these things, or do we have any control or input on that? Because the problem in many situations doesn't originate in Bothell. It comes down our way, and we deal with it. Just like the Sammamish River is an example. There was reference made to that in the plan. And it seems like that's such a large area to handle those things, and for us, how we can make any improvements in those.
Yes.
So I guess I'd be interested in knowing how we coordinate with the other regional facilities, and do those facilities have plans like we do, and why not look at the UGA and plan for that?
So-
it's already here, but eventually it will be within the city, and then we're really going to have it. So
Right. The watershed management section of the plan does to some extent cover some of the tools that we have for the regional planning. We participate in North Creek management, Sammamish River management with King County, North Creek with Snohomish County. We participate in the Water Resource Inventory 8, WIRA 8 planning for endangered species and salmon in the area as well. So we do participate on those levels. We do water quality monitoring in combination, for example, with Snohomish County and North Creek. And where we're going to get more into that is as we look into our water quality action plan, we will look at the basins and the upstream portions of the basins that are outside of the city and work with the adjacent agencies in participating with those, as well as the ones that are downstream, like Juanita and Swamp Creek and those that are downstream of us, and we'll cooperate with those agencies in those discussions. So there will be opportunities, and there are opportunities where we do cooperate regionally and in watersheds. We're working with Snohomish County, or we'll be working with them on a watershed plan, although we're a tiny part of it for Little Bear Creek. That was a requirement of their permit through the Department of Ecology, EPA. And so we do participate there regionally. Again, it's covered in that section of the plan, and our water quality action plan is going to have more specific items on how we will coordinate and work with the adjacent jurisdictions.
And just one other quick question on our rates on properties for our stormwater fees. And there was a lot of information in here and a chart on that and that type of thing. But
Yes.
are they? What's the basis of that individual property assessment? Is it's just impervious area, because you may have a small lot with a single-family resident
Yes.
on it. You may have a medium-sized lot. You may have a 5-acre parcel with a single-family resident on it.
Right.
How do, and it appears that undeveloped property has no assessment on it for stormwater, if I read this correct.
Yeah, so you bring up actually a really interesting question. Before I go there, you mentioned also why doesn't the plan cover our urban growth area? And when we look at the relatively short, the 5 or 6 year horizon of this plan, there is no plan for annexation up there according to our comprehensive plan. So that's why we didn't include that part in this particular master plan update. The next one, we may be addressing that. But your question about rates is fascinating. We did use the King County and Snohomish County rate models when we created our utility in January 1st, 1995. And that's based upon a single-family impervious unit that they created called an ESU, and then that's applied to everybody. So it is based upon sort of an equivalent single-family square footage of impervious area. We're going to be evaluating that in 2016 and see if that still makes sense and what that number should be, because how that relates to commercial, industrial, and other properties is a kind of a fascinating question. However, most agencies, actually in the states, do use that kind of a rate model. Now, some have escalating factors. I was actually discussing this with Redmond, that they have an escalating factor. The more impervious surface they have, the higher the rate, not just the dollar amount, but the higher the rate. And ours is relatively steady, but it's based on an impervious surface. And yeah, there's a lot of imperfections in that, but that's the system most people use. And I hope that answered your question. Okay.
And just to say, it still would make sense for me to, since the water's coming out of the urban growth areas a lot, that
Yes.
to kind of plan for some of that now, and if we're doing that on a regional basis, that's great, but
Yeah.
it's coming our direction, so we should be doing some planning for that.
Honestly, yeah, I think looking upstream of our watersheds into the counties where they're developing is something that we need to do more of, because this development happens upstream. How much authority we have versus how much pull we have with the county, particularly Snohomish County being upstream of us, is always a challenge, but it is something that needs to be considered.
Thank you.
All right, Councilmember Sandberg or Councilmember Rayum? Who would like to go? All right, Councilmember Sandberg.
So you said one of our critical actions was to revise our low-impact development ordinance and also the stormwater design code. Is that something that's been scheduled for Planning Commission review?
That'll happen next year, and we will do we have to do a full code and policy review per the EPA permit, the NPDES. So it'll be systematic, and it would include, I would presume, a Planning Commission review. None of that's laid out yet as far as the exact process. We are following some of the leads that some of the other cities have done in doing these reviews, and it has to be completed by the end of next year, end of 2016.
That's a federal requirement?
Yes. It's a requirement that comes out of the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permit, yes.
And so is that code creation, is that going to be pretty constrained by the requirements of the NPDES?
Really good question. I think there's a lot of latitude in the code that we actually adopt, but it does have to be presented to the Department of Ecology of Washington to acknowledge that we've done this code review and changed our code. But it hasn't been prescribed as to exactly what we do, except to the maximum extent practicable, which is.
And so is the stormwater design code, is that going to come coincident with the LID code language? Is that required also by the end of next year?
Yeah, they are required to be updated per the permit, and yes, they'll be coming along about the same time.
And then I forget what level of importance, of priority it was for dealing with private stormwater facilities, but since we've had conversations about how we encourage maintenance on private
Yes.
on private property. So can you remind me how much money that wasn't there a dollar figure budgeted in this plan or proposed in this plan to deal with private stormwater facilities, or is that just a goal?
I'm not recalling a dollar figure in dealing with it. We have a mixed bag of public and privately maintained facilities, particularly for subdivisions, where in some cases, depending upon what we inherited from King County or Snohomish County through annexations, we have a mixed bag of different facility maintenance requirements, and it causes confusion and difficulty for the utility, not uncommon with other utilities. But there was in 2006, in a draft plan, there was an identification of the cost of the city taking on all of the private facilities in subdivisions that are not being maintained by, or being maintained by private properties. But that number is no longer really valid.
Okay. And so is the idea to provide potentially a pot of money to provide grants to private property owners to encourage them to maintain their facilities, rather than sort of the carrot approach versus the heavy-handed stick approach?
I think there are a number of policy options, and that could be part of a policy option. But at this point, that what we're saying in the plan is the policy question of where we are right now and where we want to be in the future needs to be brought forward and the options considered, and that's when the council would have that consideration, because any one of those could affect our stormwater rates and how much work we do as a utility. So that hasn't been decided yet. There is no particular direction identified in this plan that we should go, because that would be sort of preemptive to the council process in going through the policy options.
So how significant of an impact do you think these private facilities are on the overall stormwater or surface water quality within the city? I mean, is this something significant that council should be thinking about as budgeting for, or is it not as big a problem as some of our other stormwater issues?
It's certainly one of the issues. The maintenance of these facilities provides both flow, control of flow and water quality, and if they're not maintained, it's a problem. And we've had issues around the city. It's hard for me to gauge if I don't think it's the number one concern that we have out there, but it's not a low concern. It's sort of a mid-level in the higher priority of things to look at. This could be, it probably occupies maybe 10% of the dollar number in the utility, something like that, if that gives you a scale. And that's, I can't say that's exact, but.
So it's 10% of the dollar amount of the utility budget, but I guess I wonder what impact percentage it has overall
on water quality?
On water quality in the city.
I think that would come out of our water quality action plan. I don't know that we can quantify it at that level without a lot of study, to be honest. I mean, there's a standard that facilities have to be designed to a fairly high level now, and the value in water quality and environment is not fully known, to be honest.
I guess I'm just trying to think if this is something that council needs to be thinking about in terms of if we wanted to budget for such an item, that would require likely a rate increase. But if it's a small percentage of the budget and yet a large portion of overall water quality, then it seems like you would be maximizing the bang for your buck. But if it's a small percentage of the budget and a small percentage of the water quality,
right,
then impact on water quality, then
it's certainly a point of confusion and difficulty with some of the customers that we have, because there's different standards for different subdivisions, and that's always been an issue, I think.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Councilmember Rayum.
Thank you. I'm sure I have little easy questions, right?
Okay.
I like the plan. I think it was really well done. It's not too little. It's not too much. So good job. I think it's well done. I do appreciate that it's that you have it in the plan to actually update it more frequently than every 21 years. That's good. Let's see. So this is another easy question. So is it MUGAs or PAAs in the Snohomish County area? Playing record. Is it Mugas? Okay, just making sure. And then, so on page 94 of the plan, but you have a slide too that shows the revenues and expenditures and that type of thing.
Sure.
What I'm curious about is under revenues, it has grants. And in one part of the plan, it said that we will set aside money in our budget to match grants. And then it's assumed that we would be getting quite a bit of grants at the tune of 75% versus our 25%.
Uh-huh.
So how come such little money for revenues from grants?
The grant revenues outside of the 2016, which is the Sammamish River Side Channel, these don't include the project match grants, nor are the project costs included down here if it's grant. If they say we have just for example, in 2017 we're planning on doing $2 million worth of grant-funded projects. I didn't put the number up here and down here. I could have put it in both places, but better to leave it out with the assumption if we don't get it, then these are still our baseline numbers. So that's why you don't see a big number in the grants up there. But you see them in the project list, but again, the costs are not included in here. That's why these numbers are relatively low in the out years. There's not the grant portion of the cost of that project. This is the utility rate-funded portion of the project that's listed here.
Okay. So would I assume the projects line then is the match? Or is that the overall?
Yeah, it includes match money. It includes match money in some of these cases, as well as fully funded or half-funded projects, depending upon the specific project itself, yes. Like Park Creek would be in here as a fairly small number, and the grant money isn't up there. So, yeah, that you could either put them in both places or have them not in both places. And I chose just to have sort of the utilities costs in here. And grants are uncertain, so I don't put them in there. Otherwise, it makes our budget look a lot bigger than it really is, and assuming we're going to get grants when we may or may not get them. Okay. If we don't get them, that means those projects will probably be pushed out to future years.
Okay. So is it in there then that we? Okay, never mind. I think I get it. Okay. So 120th Street.
Yes.
I've had stormwater engineers send me pictures saying, "What's the problem with this?" And
yes.
So I would emphasize too that that's a very big problem that's just been there for so long.
Mm-hmm.
From a stormwater perspective, it's
right.
Pretty bad. But so one of my questions is it damaging the road to have water sitting on it like that?
Certainly it is. It doesn't help pavement to have sitting on there. It probably doesn't contribute to the settlement much, in my opinion, but it contributes to the degradation of the asphalt. It makes the sidewalk unusable, of course, when the water's flowing over it. Yeah. If you walk it, you can see that the water level is right up to the sandbags that we put in. We put sandbags and plastic sheeting in there to hold it back, but it's silted up, and it's going to overflow again this winter. We know that, unless we come in and put in more sandbags. And one option we've looked at is basically a flood wall right along there to retain all the water, but that's at a fairly high cost at an issue that is the source of the issue is private property. And so we have to be careful about spending public funds on a private property issue. And it is, again, it's our number one priority in the plan as far as this is solving this, but we do have the complications of the fact that it's a private property source. It's a public problem.
So I understand you guys had quite a bit of public involvement prior to this meeting. Could you kind of in a nutshell tell the public what that was? Well,
we put the project on. It's been on the website. The development of the plan. We've had I've had 3 open houses. Fairly moderate to light response, and just we had people provide project identification and issue identification complaints. We researched all of our past complaints and issues as well. So.
Okay. So it says the water quality action plan. So I think that's what I'm really interested in. Is that so? It's not funded in that chart, not that chart, but there was another chart in here on. It's got the critical and high priority, medium priority. Page 97.
Okay.
And it doesn't show that it's funded, so I was just, is that, it's one of the asterisks then, I guess, out in 2017 through 2020, or
Yeah.
just
Um,
zero?
So we're actually starting on this water quality plan now. The last one was done by a consultant in 1996, and it was done based upon the Puget Sound Water Quality Action Plan, not the NPDES, which came after that for us as a Phase 2 agency. So we've identified it as a plan, but we can develop, we think, most of the framework of it in-house with the information that we have. Now, it could require some consultant services if we chose to go that route, but at this point we're planning on developing the framework of the plan ourselves.
Will it prioritize stormwater action areas or water bodies for restoration?
It will prioritize actions in our water bodies. We've been very careful, even with this creation of stormwater management areas and management, to not prioritize one watershed over another, but prioritize the actions that we have in there based upon the conditions and the benefits in that area. So try not to prioritize them. It could go there. It certainly could be the council's policy to have a prioritized watershed system, similar to what some other agencies have done. But at this point, that isn't in the plan. We are simply all of the watersheds drain into either North Creek, or they all drain to Lake Washington, and so we kind of treat them all as important and prioritize the activities that we put in them.
So I think it's important to prioritize them, just from a grant funding standpoint, as well as just the needs versus the revenues.
Yes.
So I'd like to see that as part of the water quality action plan, that we actually, and it helps you in a grant funding process.
Right.
You're much more better poised to say, we've locally looked at all of our creeks, we're trying to fix this one, to get grant funding from the state specifically. So, and then let's see. And so will your water quality action plan actually include stormwater retrofits and in-stream projects?
It certainly could. It'd certainly be whatever the full toolbox of possible actions are. Stream retrofits would be in there, and facilities retrofits.
Because there's $100 million a year for stormwater retrofits, and that's what I'm kind of getting at. So
Yeah.
we could either let everybody else get that money, or we could get it. So I do think it's important to prioritize and where you're going to put stormwater retrofits.
Okay.
Then, so my last thing, and this is based on a comment from, well, it wasn't really an official comment, but from UW Bothell. So the credits for water quality and flow control facilities on the rates, the credits.
Yes.
Is that something you guys will be looking at with your rate structure analysis next year, I think you said?
Well, the credit system that was in the plan, I mean, in the utility before, and then the code was eliminated. There isn't anything that said there isn't anything that says we can't do that. We don't want the rate structure to be so complicated that it becomes questionable as far as fairness. But it certainly could be part of it. I don't know that I wouldn't recommend it having the same structure as it had before, because I think that was maybe had some unfairness to it.
Do we recall, this is probably for you, Don,
Maybe.
why did we take that out? I don't recall why we did that.
Well, there were several issues. One was unfairness. It didn't apply to single family at all. And it was a credit for maintenance of the systems. And we were already requiring the maintenance of the system, and we were in fact doing private inspections by our staff. So it's something that was expected. Earlier on, I think we didn't have, when that was established, there was no inspectors going out to check to see if they were maintaining them. Now we have 2 inspectors doing that throughout the city to inspect those private facilities, and if they're not maintained, we send out notice to them and ensure that they do get them maintained. So it's nothing out of the ordinary. It's what's supposed to be expected. So that was one of the reasons. So I still have the PowerPoint from all the pros and cons and why we eliminated it. But there's a few other reasons, but I took that to council, I believe, 2 years ago.
I was here.
Right.
I was wondering why. Oh, that's it. Thanks.
Great, thank you. I guess I put my 2 cents in on 120th also. That problem seems to be getting to the point that it's going to impact other private properties. So that becomes my concern, because we know we're going to get caught in the middle on that. And then as I drive through parts of town where I can see things like North Creek or parts of North Creek and other, actually just outside the city, parts of Swamp Creek, where there's small, trees and stuff over the creek, and debris, natural debris is getting caught up in there, and we get some wintertime, start getting some high water events. We're going to get more natural debris in there, creating some flooding into the private properties. What type of maintenance do we do for that, and does that fall under the environmental remediation in your? I believe it was under the critical part of it.
Critical areas management, which is done in.
And I think there's also a portion in a high priority also.
Yeah.
So I see these, and I see the potential for it, and I see debris building up. So what type of program do we have for that?
We don't have a specific program that I'm aware of for removal of woody debris in the creeks. And this is a sticky wicket, if you will. The woody debris provides certain water quality benefits as well, but flooding is one of the things that we're tasked with. So our maintenance operations folks do look at hot spots and flooding, and if there's debris that's blocking the systems and causing the problems, they'll do probably the removal that's necessary during flood events and before flood events and after. So they do some preventative activities. We have in the plan some watershed restoration looks at some of the areas, and it would probably involve designing systems that are not subject to debris buildup and clogging, but still function well. So there's a little bit of that in there, but this has to be done in concert with our critical areas management as a city as a whole.
Okay.
So, the utility doesn't have a specific stream maintenance, especially the streams on portions on private property function.
And I guess
As
you
do
have
most.
to leave some of that there, but it
Yeah.
does get to a point where, especially when we have those heavy rains,
Right.
it could cause a problem. All right, well, I think, thank you for your presentation. Nice job. I think we have some great questions. Do we feel there's a need as council for this to come back for another, comment period or study session before the public hearing in October? No? Okay, great. Well, then we look forward to seeing this in October then.
Thank you, Council.
Great, thank you. All right, that brings us to AB 15-123. Let's see here. If I can get down to my next AB here. And that would be on our emergency fireworks. And, oh, I got to get to the right document. That's what I got to do. All right, and then we have Deputy Chief Frank Shasky here for this presentation.
So thank you, Deputy Mayor Spivey and Council Frank Shasky, Deputy Chief Fire Marshal, City of Bothell. I'm here tonight to talk about an emergency fireworks ban. This is just a brief overview of the 2015 fireworks season. Starting off here with 3 firefighter fatalities. We've heard this on the news. Along with that, there was a 4th that was severely injured. I think there was also a civilian casualty. I wasn't able to confirm that in my research also. This year, we've had record-setting property loss. In my research, I read today that it'll be weeks until we know how many homes or buildings that we've actually lost. We've also had a record number of acres burned. I could not find a statistic for the state of Washington. On the West Coast, from Alaska to California, 7.5 million acres burned. For the state of Washington, this is unprecedented in our history. There's been many evacuation warnings and orders. The next two bullet points I highlighted yellow because these relate to Western Washington. This is also a fact about this year's season that is unprecedented in that in June we had red flag warnings for Western Washington. Red flag warnings come from the National Weather Service. They indicate that there is low humidity and high temperatures, and that the conditions are essentially ripe for a wildland fire. So in June, we did have those issued for the Seattle area. Significant wildfires west of the Cascade Crest did occur in July and August, and the main point that I'm making here is that here we are in June, we're getting these warnings. There are many fire officials looking forward and predicting that this was going to be a bad fire season, and true to our predictions, we saw quite a bit of wildfires west of the Cascade Crest. A lot of those fires didn't reach the media. They were not a conflagration that involved evacuations and the loss of communities. So you didn't hear a lot about the wildland fires. I have a couple of slides here. They're media clips that will present that. This here is Northwest Large Fire Interactive Map. This is a screenshot of that map. It comes from the Northwest Interagency Coordination Center. And it's a map that shows you where all of the fires are burning in the state. This is as of August 28. Many of these fires now have been extinguished because of the weather. But the point here that I wanted to bring to you, if you follow the cursor, the pointer on the screen, as I kind of walk it up this line, I'm following the word range along the Cascade, and this is the Cascade Crest. And as I come and follow it, you'll see to the left is Western Washington, to the right is Central and Eastern Washington. Here is the Alder Lake Fire. And then up here is the Upper Skagit Complex. Excuse me there, hit the wrong button. There was evacuation of Rialto community in the Upper Skagit Complex. And there was in Alder Lake Fire, there was an evacuation warning for the town of Mineral. So the big point here is that west of the Cascades, we have active wildland fires threatening communities. Out on the peninsula, at this point in time, there were at least about 4 fires that were burning, but they don't show up on this map. There was the Paradise Fire in Queets has been burning since May, and then there was a fire in Port Angeles, and there was also one up in Neah Bay. And my next slide is Town of Mineral, and this was at the Alder Lake Fire. This is August 27, and this is a media clip, newspaper article. I just gave you the headline and the pic, but they were under an evacuation warning, and had the weather gone in the right direction after this date, they may have evacuated. It was about the August 29, that neighborhood, the rains came in. I think this fire was taken care of by that. This next slide, Shelton, Washington. This is also a fire that you didn't see a lot of news coverage on. I was struck that in Shelton they call a fire like this a large brush fire. This is a wildland fire for sure. This is the transmission line right-of-way, I believe, clearing going up the hillside. I think this is transmission lines coming from Lake Cushman and serving City of Tacoma Power and Light. What you see off over to the right, this fire started off as 20 acres, that was this area, and then grew to 50 acres. And what you see here is primarily a ground fire, a duff fire, but this is looking more like a crowning fire. So it's getting up into these trees. This was a pretty significant fire, and again, you didn't hear a lot about it, but it was out on the Olympic Peninsula. Just to kind of to close the season, this is an article I found today. Senators, more must be done to prevent future wildfires. Senator Cantwell and Senator Barroso from Wyoming gave this press release, and they're basically saying, you know, in the wake of the catastrophe that we've seen, we just need to do more. This is a similar discussion from last year, too, after the wildland season. You heard a lot of discussion about the Carlton Complex fire, and then more should have been done to prevent the conflagration that went through and destroyed the many homes in that fire. So taking you back to June, Paradise Fire in Queets, Washington, that was in the national park. We had a drought emergency declared May 15th by Governor Inslee. Fire officials statewide, my peers and I were involved into a discussion about could we have an emergency fireworks ban. And we concluded that as a result of RCW 70.77.250 sub 4, the answer is no. That law requires a 1-year waiting period for any ordinance enacted by a local authority. Governor Inslee declared emergency fire conditions for the state of Washington July 2nd, and in a follow-up media interview, he also affirmed the same, that we had concluded locally that the state could not declare an emergency fireworks ban either because of RCW 70.77. The only way you can have an emergency ban is if you have a local ordinance in effect. So this leads us to Bothell Municipal Code 8.37 with your proposed amendments. That's in your council packet. The proposed amendments to our fireworks ordinance are modeled after existing municipal emergency fireworks bans out there, ordinances. It requires the city manager to consult with the fire chief and police chief for best available public safety information pertinent to conditions. So the idea is that there has to be a nexus before a nexus creating an extreme fire hazard before an emergency fireworks ban could be implemented. The best available information pertinent to conditions, I gave some sample resources down here. There are 3 of them. National Weather Service, in your packet, I have an emergency message. It was not for Seattle. I couldn't. They don't archive their messages, so you have to kind of, if you go and research, just grab the ones that are in effect. So I can't remember which one that one was for. There's also the National Interagency Fire Center. National Interagency Fire Center takes a big picture look and also in your packet, that shows that the entire West Coast was basically in a high hazard area. And then the Northwest Interagency Coordination Center also is a great resource for information related to potential fire hazards. So the idea then again is that the fire chief, police chief would research these resources and recommend to the city manager, who then would bring this to council and recommend an emergency fireworks ban. The emergency fireworks ban issued prohibits retail sale and use of consumer fireworks, and then if enacted by council, the effective date is 1 year later. And after that, thank you, and any questions?
Thank you, Chief Shasky. Councilmember Lamb.
Thank you, Chief. I just had a question. Of the fires that you showed us pictures of before, how many of those were caused by fireworks or started by fireworks?
I don't have any information about any fireworks statewide that were caused by fireworks. There was suspicion that the Sleepy Hollow fire was human caused.
Arson or?
I don't know. I have no information on that. I don't have any statistics that have any of these wildfires started by fireworks. The issue is clearly fireworks are an ignition source and a nexus that could cause them.
And so in the or in the report, you said that this year we had more complaints or more calls for a fireworks ban. How did it compare in terms of actual fire incidents caused by fireworks, given the conditions, to other years?
Well, so there's two questions there, I think. Number
Well, one I think we answered. I mean, one you said we've had more complaint. That wasn't really a question. There was a statement in here that we've had more calls this year for a ban on fireworks, either permanent or temporary, than in any year prior.
That is true.
So that's not, so that wasn't my question. My question is, how did the actual number of fires in Bothell caused by fireworks relate to this year as opposed to previous years?
The statistics are low. We have 4 reports of injuries caused by fireworks this year. I know that the crews were busy chasing a number of small brush fires. We have no real property loss, structures lost as a result of fireworks.
And would that be higher? Have we had different years that were higher than that? I mean, I know we've had structure fires in the past that were caused by fireworks.
By comparison, I would say this year relatively lower from an incident point of view than in past.
So I guess that kind of gets to my next question, that if we have a situation like that where you have I think conditions were drier this year, is it fair to say that people sort of exercised restraint because it was fire, if you look at the actual result of what happened compared to just kind of speculation as to what might have happened?
I've had some discussions with other fire marshals on this issue. One of our thoughts is here in Western Washington that we have a very quick response, and as a result, any fires caused by fireworks didn't have enough time to develop. That's the best I can give you at the moment.
But did we see a different, when you say that any fires, it doesn't sound like there were more incidents this year than there were in years past. There actually were less incidents this year than in years past.
I would say there weren't any more. I wouldn't say there were any less.
Okay. And then with respect to the idea of having an emergency ban, that as it's currently drafted, the city manager would consult with the fire chief and then would make a recommendation to the city council to ban it. What time, is that sort of at any time, or is there a thought that you would say, hey, for those who are anticipating, there are a lot of people who plan around the 4th of July, not just citizens and people celebrating, but also business owners and property owners. is there some thought that you would have to make that decision by a particular point in time, or would people be in a position where they would have spent, $100,000 buying fireworks supplies, and then you would say, hey, the week before we have an emergency ban?
Well, that's a lot of fireworks that you just mentioned for
But that's
100,000. But yes, I
But
get
that's
your.
typically, honestly, that's how much.
Yeah.
When they buy them, there's some for nonprofit groups where that's their budget for the whole year. They sell $25,000 worth of, or they gross or net $25,000. That to net that, you probably gross significantly more than that.
Correct. Yes, you are correct. In thinking about this problem, we come up with a drop-dead date where we'd have to make the decision. I see that as June 24th, 1 week at least before July 1. And the reason for that date is that the wholesalers come to town and start setting up their fireworks stands, and they are going to deliver the fireworks product on July 1. So we'd want to be ahead of the wholesalers actually initiating the setting up and delivery of the product.
And I think from the city standpoint, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think, and again, your job is to advocate for, fire prevention and fire safety. And I think from your side of the ledger, that makes perfect sense. I think if you're looking at, as policymakers, we have to look at your side of the ledger. We also have to look at the other side of the ledger, which is the people on the other side of that equation. So if I'm a Young Life group that has a fireworks stand, that I'm relying on that to pay for my kids to be able to go on a camping experience the next summer, and I'm not going to enter into a contract a week before, 10 days beforehand. I'm likely to have entered into a contract weeks, if not months beforehand, not only to secure the location, but also to enter into a contract with a fireworks wholesaler. I know from people, they set that up many, many months in advance. Now if we enact this, they may include a provision in their contracts that say, this is, if the city declares a state of emergency. But do you see from a public policy standpoint that having an opportunity like this doesn't necessarily even afford an opportunity for public comment before it would be made?
This is something that is declared in an extreme situation.
But let's just play. Would you have felt like this 4th of July, the fire chief would have declared this kind of an emergency and called for a ban, had he had the authority to do so? Okay.
Yes, I could see us having done that this year. Yeah, in 2015.
So if that's the case, then I guess I would say I wouldn't support this unless it had an opportunity for public comment and unless it had a longer lead time to be able to allow the public to participate in this decision and allow the community who may be relying on or expecting fireworks to be part of their celebration to be able to plan for that.
Yeah.
So for me, I would say it would have to be at least June 4th, not June 24th, before any kind of a decision like that would be made. And I think there has to be an opportunity, given our calendar, to have public input before a decision like that would be made.
Part of the reason I said June 24th would be the drop-dead date that you would have to make a call on this, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. First, I don't think any of us can disregard the economics of consumer fireworks. There are charities who raise their money to do just what you said, go on camping trips. There's Boy Scouts, there's Little League ball teams, the list goes on and on. So I never disregard, me personally, and I don't think any of us should, the economics of these types of activities. Nonetheless, the other problem is how do we predict that we are actually going to be on the 4th of July in an extreme hazard situation, and thinking about the resources that I presented here in my presentation, we get 7 to 10 days of weather prediction. So we can look forward 7 to 10 days, and have a good prediction of of where we're going. So if we're in a warm, dry weather pattern, the way we were through May and June of this year, and come June 24th, we're in this situation where we're thinking about it. We perhaps have talked to the retailers, the wholesalers, and saying there's a problem here. We better keep our eyes open. We might be going to this. But then on June 24th, we're close enough to July 4th that if we couldn't see that weather pattern going to a cooler, wetter type of situation, then you make the call. And so in that regard, we've at least done the best we possibly could in the situation to manage the impacts to the economics of the charities and the wholesalers, and then have good information before we make that final decision.
Yeah, and to be clear, I didn't mean to imply that you didn't care about the other side of the ledger. I just meant that you're doing your job in the sense that you're focused on the public safety aspect of it, which is what you should be, and that's your. I mean,
yeah.
You're in the fire service. We would hope that would be your interest. I'm just saying that as the policymakers, we have to balance that, and we have to look at both sides of the equation. But I really appreciate your presentation, and I look forward to talking about this more.
Any other questions? Councilmember Sandberg?
Thank you for your presentation and your staff report. I thought it was really thorough, and I thought you did a really good job outlining the kind of resources that the city would review in making a decision, not just, we feel like it's going to be dry this year. I mean, there are actual accepted resources and forecasts that aren't subject to political pressures within a particular city, and so I appreciate that. In the actual proposed code language, in the emergency ban of fireworks sale and use, this is the proposed section 837-211. It has sort of this additional step of the city manager recommending a temporary order prohibiting the sale and use of consumer fireworks. Do you see that in your experience? Have you seen that in the other jurisdictions who have enacted this authority for themselves to have emergency bans? Does the city council just make that decision directly based on evidence presented by the fire marshal?
I think the best example to point to, excuse me, would be Chelan County, and as the weather developed, they have three levels of burning restrictions, and so when you get to the most restrictive level, everything is prohibited, from campfires to fireworks to anything. In Chelan County, it doesn't seem to be much of an issue. It's understood that when the weather gets hot and dry over there, that they're going to go to that. In the western side, I don't know of any jurisdictions that have issued an emergency fireworks ban at this point. The ones we looked at were San Juan County, and primarily Bonnie Lake is where this was modeled from.
So Bonnie Lake has an emergency ban ordinance in effect. They've just never utilized it.
Correct.
And so in Chelan County, who issues the burn ban? Do the county commissioners do that, or does the fire marshal for the district there issue that? And is there public process, or is it just an accepted? You said it sounded like it was more like an accepted issuance.
It's issued from the county council level, and I don't know if that's on the recommendation of the fire marshal, the chief, and the county commissioner.
Okay, and then it also says, so the decision shall be based on a reasonable and articulable belief that hazardous conditions exist where the sale and use of consumer fireworks poses a severe wildland or woodland fire hazard. And then that would increase, which would increase the risk and threaten public safety. So is it important to have those qualifiers, wildland and woodland fire hazard, or just that it poses a severe fire hazard? I'm just wondering if someone might interpret that to say, well, Bothell doesn't have wildland, so there's no wildland fire hazard.
Well, that's not entirely true. We actually have a fairly large chunk of Department of Natural Resource land just west of the FEMA property, kind of sandwiched in between FEMA and then the Ferulin site. Then there's the Boy Scout camp also, which is a large wooded area, and you go along Norway Hill out around Valhalla. You have a fair amount of woodland areas. I guess I don't disagree with your proposal to drop that language. I think you could drop it, and just using severe fire hazard would be enough for us. So it somewhat qualifies the nexus that we're looking for, though, and what we're looking for if we were to go to an emergency fireworks ban is the potential of a conflagration like we've seen with the Sleepy Hollow fire in Wenatchee, Chelan, Okanagan, where you've had a fire that was in a wildland or woodland and then burned through a community and took out many houses. So.
Okay, thanks. Can I just give my comment on?
Sure.
Okay, so I think given the conditions that we saw this year, it makes sense to at least give the city the authority to enact an emergency ban. We do not have a ban on fireworks. They are allowed in the city, but we don't have the authority to enact an emergency ban, and that just became really clear this year when even the governor couldn't issue any kind of ban on fireworks. And so I think we need to at least have that ability to do so. And yes, we have to weigh whatever revenue generation nonprofit groups are hoping to gain from the sale of fireworks, but we have to balance that with public safety. And so the argument has been made that this would make it difficult for certain fundraising groups to make money on fireworks in the city, and in my opinion, the public safety is more important than the ability to raise money, and so we need to have this authority to do so. And when I was looking at the actual language, I wanted to change it because it says here, upon recommendation of the city manager, the city council may issue a citywide temporary order. And I think that this is a policy decision that that a city council should be tasked with. I mean, we had this conversation as well. Does the city council make a decision, or does the fire marshal make a decision? And the fire marshal said, well, I think maybe it should be the city council, the governing body, that should make the decision. And so I think that the language is just as strong if we say the city council may issue a citywide temporary order prohibiting the sale and use of consumer fireworks, and that this decision is still based on the same information that you line out, and that the council and or the city manager shall consult the fire chief and or police chief for best available public safety information. So, and I'm comfortable with putting in whatever the deadline date is, so that we don't we don't create a situation where July 1st we've enacted a ban and then people have already made preparations to sell fireworks. I'm willing to have a conversation about, what that date should be. I mean, June 24th seems reasonable because that is what a weather forecast only goes out 10 days, and we might incur the public ire if we made a decision too early to ban fireworks, and then all of a sudden we had a week of cool, wet weather, and people said, well, that was silly that you did that. So I think we need to find a reasonable balance between what that deadline date would be. But I am in support of giving the city the authority to enact an emergency ban, because even though we didn't necessarily have any fireworks related large fires in the city, you said that crews had been out suppressing them and acting quickly. We could have a situation where we can't act quickly enough, and like you said, something gets out of control, and so I think it's important for the city council to have that kind of authority with the fire marshal.
Any other questions? Councilman Maria?
So just so I'm clear, so 8.37.211, that's all new language?
Correct.
Not just the underlined ban? Okay.
Correct, yes. Sorry about that.
Okay.
That section should have been underlined.
Okay, so next time it comes back, it'll be okay. And then I had the same question. So who is it? So would the city council would wait for the city manager then to make the recommendation, or can the city council just hold a special meeting and make a ban? Or would it, I guess I have the same question about the language, which I don't, city manager having a recommendation, I'm not too concerned about that. It's just about, who's making the decision?
Could we let the city attorney weigh in here?
Sure.
I would say also, and Joe could provide his opinion, but it's the city council ultimately making the decision. The recommendation is flowing through the city manager from the experts in the field, which is entirely consistent with state law, entirely consistent with the protocol manual, following sort of the chain of command and the form of government that we operate within.
So it would have to be, the city council couldn't just hold a special meeting and say, we think we should ban fireworks. It would rather be that
well, you wouldn't be following the
information
process of the ordinance. You'd have to still provide, obtain, and request the recommendation from, at least the way I read the ordinance, from the city manager, and the city manager would have the recommendation from the public safety officials.
City attorney?
Just to add on to that, it was drafted this way because council, this is an area where council needs expertise. They need advice from people with the expertise to bring this to them. It's not something that's readily known how bad the situation is just from a layman's standpoint. So we crafted the ordinance this way so that you would, so that people who are the experts and who are in public safety would be the ones who would be monitoring this. But they work for, their chain of command is the city manager. So anything coming from staff in a city needs to go up through the city manager. So that's the reason it's written that way. You need the experts, but the experts need to act through their chain of command. So that's why it's set up that way.
Okay, thanks. So I think this came up before, but how many cities in King County have just an outright ban on fireworks?
Renton, Bellevue, Kirkland, Redmond, Kenmore,
Seattle.
Issaquah, Seattle. 7. I'm getting close. I don't have an yeah. Those are the ones I know of off the top of my head.
Okay. Yeah. Do you know why they have banned fireworks?
The reason seems always to be that first, the community, because it continually ever more populates and develops more densely, and then eventually those complaints rise up to be loud enough that either a political action group or something pushes the issue, and then there was a decision by the local authority. The most recent occurred in City of Linwood. About 2 years ago, they decided to have a permanent ban. That permanent ban was challenged by a petition signature, but that didn't prevail. So it was this year was their first year that they actually did not have fireworks. Last year was their 1-year waiting period.
Okay. So is it safe to say that just about every city our size around us has a ban on fireworks?
I'm not sure every city our size would qualify, but certainly most of the east side communities, suburbs of Seattle, do have permanent fireworks bans.
Okay. And I imagine they have youth groups and Boy Scout groups that still get to go on their camping trips and whatnot, right? That's a little outside the fire marshal.
But I could not answer to you how they're funded.
So, yeah, I think the code changes are fine. I do think that I would still like to see, and I think this has already been an issue we've voted on, but to have an advisory vote on banning fireworks altogether would be something I'd like to see. This year's, I didn't let fireworks off. I've got 3 little boys. My whole neighborhood usually has fireworks, but everybody didn't use them this year, and I was thankful because we have a lot of tall trees around our houses that could have easily caught fire. But I think it's time. I think it's time that we ask the public what they'd like to do. We got a lot of feedback. People want a ban, and I think it would actually help with making it much more predictable for nonprofits to just know whether or not there is going to be fireworks sale or not within the city, instead of it being an emergency. But I do like the emergency aspect because I would have been 100% for it this year. So that is all the questions I have.
Councilmember Evans?
Looking at an agenda bill that was for the April 14th, 2015 meeting. King County, there are 22 out of 36 cities that ban fireworks. And in Snohomish County, there are 7 out of 19 cities that ban fireworks. That was listed in the agenda report. I guess my concern is this issue, as Councilmember Ream alluded to, kind of mushrooms into the whole issue of whether or not we ban fireworks altogether or whatever the case may be. So I think they're kind of, we did address that. We do have a process that the public can, I think, put together an initiative to get it on the ballot, and that was what, as a council, we talked about and was approved, is my understanding. As I was reading this information in the packet, specifically the item that was added here where it mentioned severe wildland or woodland fire hazards. And I think in the majority of your presentation was related to, I think, showed a lot of the wildland, I guess they're considered wildland fires throughout the state and things. And we do have natural areas in the city, but I think the difference between wildland fires maybe on the eastern side and wildland fires on the western side, or specifically in cities, is we have so many more resources to get to that situation before it gets out of control. So it's a little different, I think, looking at it. We did have a severe condition this year, dry condition. Fortunately, we didn't have any major incidents, which was good. But I think that I think the emergency ban is something to consider. Fortunately, we live in a city that has an excellent fire department and with a lot of facilities and things, and doesn't mean that situation couldn't occur, but certainly we're in a better position than the areas on the small towns on the east side of the mountains and those types of things. They just don't have the facilities that we do. So I do support the language as drafted that it go through the city manager. That is our chief executive of the city as an administrator, and I think that that's the process that we deal with in a city manager form of government, that things go through the city manager up to the city council. We're the policy-making body. They're the administrative body, and they make recommendations to us to set policy. So I think it's fine to leave it that way. I don't think all of a sudden the council is going to have a meeting and cancel fireworks. I mean, we wouldn't do that unless we had the backup to do that, which is what staff is going to give us. So I think the process that's as outlined here is fine. I guess I want to be careful not to the two issues overlap. A ban on fireworks versus an emergency ban on fireworks or sales is a little bit, in my mind, two different things. They do overlap some, but I think there is some difference, and so that's my thoughts on it. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Chief. Mike, I got just a couple things. One is, and maybe this is for the city attorney, but how would this be any different than the mayor making a declaration of emergency? It seems like it's, that's one of the two things that the mayor has sole power to do, and it's the declaration of emergency is in consultation with staff and the experts on that. So how would, how would it be different?
Yeah, we looked at declaration of emergency as an option for declaring a fireworks ban this prior year, and it just doesn't fit. If you look at the basis for doing a declaration of emergency,
I guess I'm referring to more of the model of
the process?
of the mayor making the declaration of emergency to ban the fireworks.
Well, I suppose you could construct something that would look something like that process, but it's the declaration of emergency process is a sort of everything else has fallen apart. There's not the normal continuity of government. It's designed to deal with a situation where somebody can't act. And this would be a different situation. That's why we set it up in a more orderly, more hierarchical fashion to go through our normal chain of command.
All right. No, I just, it seemed to like that kind of fell into that category, and that's why I thought I'd ask.
We did see this year City of Wenatchee do something similar to what you're...
They had the event to declare the emergency, where this would be a preemptive strike in an emergency ban.
Chelan County declared emergency, City of Wenatchee declared, and then they passed a resolution banning fireworks.
And declaration of emergency gets you potential federal money, and that's why you do it. So
Right,
big reason.
right, and for that reason, we couldn't see that under the declaration of emergency that you could actually have the fireworks ban along with it.
Okay. All right. Would there be anything else before we move on?
I just had some questions, and I didn't get an opportunity to weigh in on that. So, just as a policy matter, I'm more inclined to allow a vote on this than to do it, because I think Councilmember Sandberg wants to ban fireworks, and she said that that's her desire, is to ban fireworks, which is a perfectly fine position. I think people in our city have different opinions going back and forth, and I think the argument isn't that people make money off of fireworks. The argument is expectations. And clearly if you have an emergency ban, nobody's making any money. The question is, does somebody enter into a contract where their expectations are then unsettled by an emergency action? And I think that a better approach is just to say, you know what, we have a lot of people in our community. City of Briar is doing this. They're asking their community to vote on this. We originally commented to those who were asking for that in our community to say, look, if there's a groundswell of support, go out and collect petitions, put it on the ballot. Nobody's even tried to do that. because it's easier to ask a legislative body to act for you. So I asked at the time, I said, does anybody on this council want to ban fireworks? And Councilmember Sandberg was the only one who said yes. I'm happy to have that conversation again. The concern I have with this approach is that, as you indicated, you're dealing with weather projections. It puts a lot of pressure on our staff to make a call one way or the other. And I'm not sure that it necessarily, I mean, I think fireworks can be dangerous in years. I think the year we had the house fire, it was overcast. I mean, I think fireworks are just inherently dangerous on some level. And I think a community can make the balancing test. I just don't think that should be done without a vote of the people of the city of Bothell. And I think the process you've outlined is better than most, and I think it's a perfectly fine approach. I just think, given the level of conversation on this, we should probably settle the question one way or the other in terms of just having an outright ban on fireworks.
Councilmember Sandberg.
So, yes, we have had this conversation before at council, and there is, obviously, the council can make the legislative decision to ban fireworks. It can put an advisory vote on a ballot where people can answer a question while they're voting, and the council is not required to follow what the advice is in the vote. And then finally, it is the petition led citizen initiative, which my understanding is if that made it to the ballot, that then compliance with the decision would be required. The problem with the citizen-led initiative is that it's a huge barrier to get something like that on the ballot. I mean, it requires collecting 15% signatures of the registered voters in the city, and that's a huge barrier for an individual or a group to do. And so that's why, in my opinion, the council has chosen that option, knowing that there's no citizen group who's going to be able to do that. So I really think that if we wanted to get issues,
Councilmember Sandberg, just let's not make assumptions of other council members' reasonings, please.
I think if we wanted to really gauge what the community's desire is on fireworks, we should put an advisory ballot, an advisory vote on a ballot, and it's not an expensive proposition. We would have to pay to put a vote before the people either way, whether it was advisory or not. And so I think the advisory ballot is the way to go.
Okay. That brings us to the end of this. Thank you, Chief, for your presentation. And
Council, could we have some direction on whether or not you?
Yeah, I was just going to say we need to figure out what our next step is here.
We can certainly bring back the ordinance for council to consider at a future meeting, or modify it as you see wish, or not bring it back at all.
I'd speak.
Let's just we'll go around the table here, and I just without comment, I would just like to know, bring back the ordinance as is written, or not. Councilmember Evans.
I'm fine with bringing back an ordinance for the council to consider on an emergency ban.
Okay. Councilmember Lamb.
I'm fine with considering it.
Councilmember Ayum.
Bring it back for council consideration.
Councilmember Sandberg.
Bring it back with the word change to just severe fire hazard.
I think staff got that. I was just asking for a bring it back or not bring it back. So, okay, let's bring it back. All right. So that brings us to nearly the 8 o'clock hour, and our next item is a budgeted for 30 minutes. We're already beyond our budgeted time on items, so we'll go ahead and take our council break right now, and we'll come back, and then we just have a few more items, and we'll push on. So council will be adjourned until 8:10. All right, Bothell City Council is now back in session, and that brings us to our next agenda bill, which would be 15-124, a study session to discuss a new council code of ethics. And we'll have a presentation by City Attorney Joe Beck.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Last time this was before you, I went through the proposed new code, ethics code, step by step. I'm not going to do that tonight. I'm just going to just a brief couple comments, and then I think your time's better spent discussing and giving direction on this. I just wanted to reiterate, though, that what an ethics code should cover and what it should do. And your ethics code is a written compilation of standards of conduct. It should reflect the values of the organization. And I also want to remind you that by its very nature, ethics and conduct, codes of conduct, have some portions of the code need to be mandatory, conduct-based, and some sections of an ethics code, a good ethics code, will be aspirational, that meaning you can't legislate or codify every little detail that you might want to have, or way that you might want to have somebody act in consideration of ethics. So some of the language that's included is on purpose. It's included to remind members of council and board members of how they should conduct themselves, give the framework of how they should conduct themselves, but ultimately it doesn't really lend itself. Some of these concepts don't lend themselves to black and white letter of the law approach. So that's what the thoughts that went into drafting this. We've again, I've written it, drafted it as a part of the city code. It could just as well be adopted as a continuation of your protocol manual. It does not have to be codified in code, but I've drafted it that way, following the example of some of the other cities in the area. It is modeled, in part at least, on some of the more recently adopted ethics codes by some of the surrounding communities. And I think it is the most up-to-date approach to ethics and ethics codes, and adapted for the city of Bothell and hopefully fitted for the city of Bothell. It's certainly not the be-all and end-all as I've drafted it. It is rather a starting point for council to look at. I think it's a good approach, and there are reasons we chose the various provisions and chose to go with the framework that is before you. And I'm happy to explain why we made those decisions and why we chose to construct it as a proposal in the way that it is constructed. But ultimately, it's up to council to decide how you want to conduct your business and how you want to keep yourselves accountable on these types of issues. So with that, I will be happy to answer questions and just encourage that we talk through and get some direction on how to go forward with this.
Okay, thank you, City Attorney. So we've had a presentation before. We've got this here in front of us. Are there any questions of the City Attorney? Councilmember Lamb.
Joe, thanks for your presentation and for the work that you've done on this. I really appreciate it. I had two questions on, or actually three questions. The first was on 4D, the representation of third parties. It says, except in the course of official duties, officials shall not appear on behalf of the financial interests of third parties before the bodies on which the officials serve or in interactions with the bodies assigned staff. Does that include third-party bodies, like where we appoint somebody out to a different regional committee?
What page are you working on?
I'm on page 45 of 58, and it's at the top. It's second full paragraph, third paragraph down.
Yes, I believe it would include that.
So, for example, if you had somebody who was appointed to the Sound Transit Board and worked for a different municipality, and they were asking for the Sound Transit to make an award of a particular route or of a particular benefit to the municipality that they worked for, as opposed to the city of Bothell, would that be covered by this?
Yeah, I believe by this or by another section.
Section 10 as well.
Yes.
That may be what your Section 10 reads. That when acting in an official capacity as a city official representing the city, excuse me, officials shall represent the official policies or positions of the city council, board, or commission to the best of their ability when the city council, board, or commission has taken a position or given instruction. When the city official is appointed to fill an official role in a governing body in a capacity that is not dependent upon their status as a city of Bothell official, but for example as a representative of a geographic area, the official shall endeavor to represent the policies or positions consistent with those of the constituency he has been appointed to represent.
Exactly, and I think between those two sections, I would interpret it that way, and the intent certainly would be that if you're representing the city of, if you've been appointed to represent the city of Bothell, you are bound, and I would say this is true under our existing protocol manual, but just not as spelled out as clearly. You have a duty to represent the interests of the city faithfully.
So if somebody was a member of, let's say, like the Sound Transit Board, and they were in their capacity in sort of their day job where they make a living, were communicating with members of that board to which they sat on, then to try to induce them to give money to their day job as opposed to the city of Bothell where they're elected, do you think that would be a violation of our existing protocol manual?
I'd have to go back and look at our existing protocol manual to see how well it is spelled out. Like I said, it's. I think the principle is there. I'm not sure how clearly that specific set of facts would be fall under our existing protocol manual. But the concept is that you need to separate your various roles and clearly state what role you're acting under in various situations.
And do you feel like that would be a violation of this policy as drafted?
Yes,
more clearly so.
If you're in a situation where you're sitting there and only sitting there because you are appointed by the city of Bothell, in that role you need to represent the interests of the city of Bothell. You have an obligation to do that, and anything else is a violation of the requirements of this code, as I would.
And if you were communicating with members of staff at a different time from that same body in your different capacity in the same body that you serve on the governing board of, trying to get money for a different jurisdiction, would that be a conflict under this policy?
You know, that's a dicey question. I think there's a principle where you can speak as an individual, and that's recognized under this code. So you take yourself out of, and you say, I am speaking as an individual. There may be some room for that. That may be an inherent conflict, honestly.
It's not resolvable.
Yeah, that's just not resolvable.
And then the third question I had, so it's covering 4D and 10, it has to do with property. It says if the city has any ongoing interest or stated intent or goal to acquire, or if the official will personally benefit by the city acquiring or not acquiring the property, it seems like that begs kind of some modifier or clarifier there. And I was thinking of saying by either having a financial interest in the property or in a financial interest in an adjacent property.
Can you again tell me where you're reading?
I'm
from?
sorry. It's in H. This is on page 46 of 58.
Okay, under H, right. I should have been able to go right to that.
And so it would simply be what I think would modify that is just a parenthetical at the end by saying, for example, or i.e., if the official has a financial interest in the property or a financial interest in an adjacent property, immediately adjacent property. And then just kind of as I don't know if it's a Scrivener's issue, and you cite this in the side of it, says a change is needed for the elimination of for the appearance of conflict. Is the thought that, are you asking for our,
No, I'm explaining why.
you're just need, or are you saying that you're asking for our input in terms of like what would be a substitute for that, or just suggesting that it needs to be revised somehow?
No, that comment was just an explanation that from the last meeting to this meeting, I made some of the change in section 2, or I'm sorry, it's section H now, based on the elimination of the sort of really confusing appearance of conflict language on
Right.
page 2.
Okay. Thanks a lot. I appreciate all your work on this.
Any other council members? Councilmember Sandberg?
So on that same section H, so it currently reads, if the official will personally benefit. And so Councilmember Lamb is proposing a qualifier for that. So do you feel that that's necessary if, when you say personally benefit is not qualified enough, it has to say financial interest in property or immediately adjacent property?
I don't have an opinion on that. It's really a question of where council wants to go with it.
And I don't think it's a qualifier, to be clear. I think it's expanding it. I think it makes it broader, not narrower. A qualifier would imply that there's some sort of an exemption or narrowing. It's actually a broadening of the definition.
Okay. So I'm going to go back a few pages to page 44. And this is the apparent conflict of interest in litigation matters. And this is what exists currently in our protocol manual. And do other cities have this type of discussion in their code? I mean, it seems to be pretty unique to Bothell.
Yeah, you're exactly right. It should be entirely unique to Bothell because I drafted it out of whole cloth at council's direction. I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago when we had an incident that came up, and I don't even remember the details of the incident, but I know that it triggered a desire from council to add something like this, and so I went out and drafted it and brought it back to council, and council adopted it in this form.
And so the first sentence reads, a council member who actively supports a position contrary to an official City of Bothell action or position, and then so forth, must recuse themselves and not participate in any vote, so forth, so on. So what does actively support mean? Actively supports a position contrary. If I were to just reiterate a statement that I had made previously, is that actively supporting a position contrary?
Well, I can't just answer that question specifically, but because it needs a little more context than that. But actively support is just the dictionary definition of actively support. It was intended, I can tell you when I wrote it, the concept that I was getting at and that I thought, that I feel like council was getting at, was that it doesn't really matter what's in your heart and what's in your mind, where your sympathies lie, so long as you don't go out and actively, as a council member, go out and actively act against the council's stated interest. And so it was getting at that concept. So the idea is you're doing something against the interest of the city, and it could be triggered, I suppose, by speaking out in a way that undermines the city's position. So yeah, theoretically, speaking out in an undermining way could trigger that in my mind.
So speaking out in an undermining way, for example, by someone could interpret reiterating a previous position would be speaking out in an undermining fashion. And so when does it cross the line into...
If I might, the I don't remember the exact details, but what it boiled down to, when there's a council decision, we speak as a unified body, and it was, if I recall correctly, and there was a decision made, and a council member or two were speaking out against the decision later on, and it was in an official capacity. And when we speak publicly after a decision, we speak as a unified body, and that's, if I remember correctly, where this came from.
I think it was more than just speak. This change, I can tell you, was not triggered just by somebody speaking out. It was actually triggered by somebody working, or the perception was somebody was working behind the scenes in an active way, more than just speaking out. I don't think we've ever tried to enforce. The council has very limited history with trying to enforce this, number one. Number two, a lot of this is aimed at it's that ethical, what does it mean to, what is the conduct that we expect of our members? And so council members are supposed to take this as instruction and self-police themselves. So that's where it's mostly come into account.
Right.
And what was involved in the prior that triggered this was somebody actually working with the opposition behind the scenes, or at least that's the perception of council, and so that's how this came to be.
And I think to further elaborate on that, I mean, I think it's an issue of, as you indicated, of actively communicating with somebody who is on the opposite side of a legal matter. I mean, just like members of a collective bargaining unit, when they go to an AWC conference, there are certain things, you know, even when you're in an adversarial proceeding, you can't be on both sides of the fence. You can't say, well, I'm going to be in meetings with both the plaintiff and the defendant and have information about the strategy of both the plaintiff and defendant. If you're communicating with one side of the litigation, you're actively supporting that side of the litigation, it's presumed that you shouldn't be involved in the other side. And I think that's a very common practice in litigation. And it doesn't mean that somebody can't speak. It just means you can't be on both sides. You can't ride both sides of the fence.
You can't feed information, confidential
that's
information,
more
and that
accurate,
sort of thing.
yeah.
So I guess, that might have been the intent, but their language as I read it now doesn't encompass the richness of that earlier situation, and it's not likely that that situation will repeat itself identically, and yet we're writing code to address any future situation. And I understand that we don't want to have council members disclose confidential information that would jeopardize the city's position, and that's why I feel we have that language in section G, which is on page 46, which speaks specifically to confidential information about officials shall not knowingly disclose confidential information. And we could include in that, information that would jeopardize the city's position in litigation, which would could include appeals of a growth management hearing board, which is what the language that you have there. I feel like this could be used to stifle any kind of dissenting opinion, and it's not clear what actively supporting means. I mean, historically speaking, actively supporting meant the insinuation that somebody was working on both sides of the fence. But that's not, to me, if I were to, when I read this, that's not a clear interpretation. And when I read down in section 2, because this language is really strong, and so when I read down in section 2, it says, once litigation has been served or filed, communication regarding the case with anyone other than city staff or legal counsel involved in the litigation of the case is discouraged. Well, is discouraged seems pretty weak. I mean, after we've had all this conversation about how such a violation it was. I mean, why wouldn't we, if we're going to have this language, why wouldn't we say that communication is prohibited?
Are you asking that as a rhetorical question, or are you looking for an answer?
Both. I'm not in support of this section in general. I think that we can capture it in section G, by including additional language about confidential information. I guess it's rhetorical in the sense that if this language is designed to significantly limit this conversation, then discouraged doesn't seem to be the right word.
I think that, well, and Joe could answer as well, but I mean, I think the difference there is that you could communicate with somebody who's not on the opposing side of it, and you don't need to. It says that's why the language is less constricted, because the communication could include communications to people who have no interest. It could include communications to the media. It could include comments made in a public city council meeting about litigation, which are required because you're having a public debate about it. The language in the immediately preceding paragraphs is specifically addressing information and conduct with people who are opposing the city's position. And that's a really unremarkable, if you serve on the board of directors of a company, if someone is suing your company, it's completely unremarkable that you would say the board shouldn't be feeding information to the people who are suing the city or having direct and independent negotiations or communications with their attorney. That's the analogous role to being on the city council. You can say whatever you want. You can say, look, I disagree with the city's position, and I didn't vote for it, and nobody's prevented from doing that. The idea is that you're prevented from having communication directly with opposing parties when your interests in the city's position are not aligned. And that seems to me to be really unremarkable.
So I guess I would respond that we're not a corporation. We are council members of an organization responding to the opinions of a very varied constituency. And I guess it's just unclear to me from this language. It sounds as though a council member could speak. I mean, from what I'm hearing you say is that the council member could speak against a position because they have the right to do so, but then the language says that you can't take a position.
I don't think it's what it says at all. I think, and since you asked the question, it says a council member who actively supports a position contrary to an official City of Bothell action or position, and this is specifically in the context of litigation. So, for example, a council member who exchanges emails on a private server with an opposing party in a case would be specifically in that position. The public has no way of knowing that communication has taken place. The public has no access to that email, but the person is communicating directly with an opposing party. That doesn't serve the public interest. And that has nothing to do with being a corporation or being a city. It's just having to be with being transparent, that if you're on one side of a case, you're on one side. You just can't be on both sides of the same legal case. You can't say, I oppose the city's position and I'm directly communicating with their attorneys and I'm actively advocating against the city's position, but simultaneously I'd like to be in an executive session where I have information about strategy and positions and the city's bottom line, any more than a member of our fire service who is negotiating in the union could say, who is sitting on our city council, could go into an executive session and talk about what our bottom line was for the fire contract, and then go back to his brothers in the fire service and say, hey, I support the union's position and I support the city's position. It has to do with a clarity of roles and a clarity of definitions, and that's replete throughout Washington State Code as well as the city code, that you can't wear two hats at the same time. You can't be both on one side of a negotiation and on the other side of the negotiation and be privileged to the information on both, unless you're a mediator or a judge or somebody that none of us are as members of this council.
So active support is not speaking out against a position adopted by this council.
I think
Active support would be communication with with the other party that opposes the city.
I think if you had a press conference and said, I don't support the city on A, this does not cover that. But if you were to, behind closed doors, give privileged information to somebody, then this covers that.
Or if you were communicating with somebody on information that may or may not be related, it may or may not be confidential, that's covered by a separate provision. But this would say, if I'm emailing on a private email server with the opposite party in litigation, that's an issue. That's an issue if you were in a union and you were negotiating the contract. You can't be on both sides of the table. Now, I may stand up there as a member of a firefighters union and say, I think the city council's offer stinks and I'm going to vote against it. And I think they're in the wrong place. But if I go into that meeting and go into that executive session and come out of that executive session and start emailing back and forth about different aspects of that union negotiation, that you can't do. And I think that's exactly what this is designed to get at. And I think
Well, then I think we should define what actively supports is. And you can do that in section 2, where you can say actively supports means, because this is the preamble to that entire section. And it says that basically if you actively support whatever that means, a position contrary to the adopted position, you have to recuse yourself from executive session. You can't participate in any votes, and as long as active support means what you say, which is communication with an opposing side, as it reads in the preamble, it doesn't seem.
I guess I would say two things. One is I don't know that it's relevant unless you actively support the opposing side. If I actively support the city's position and somebody calls me up who's on the other side and says, I think you're full of it, and I say, I don't think I am, it's not trying to target any communication at all. I think the issue is when you have somebody communicating on a private email server with an opposing party in a legal matter without making that known to anybody, that's playing both sides of the fence.
But it doesn't say that in this language. So
it's odd to me that we're now trying to narrow the scope. I mean, it seemed like the desire in our protocol manual is to broaden the ethics ordinance and to include more activity rather than less. And it seems like in this instance, some of us want to narrow it and make it less protective of the city's position, which I think is
speaks to intent and motivation. I'm talking about clarity and my concern that that this language might stifle minority opinion and dissent. So it's not about narrowing; it's about clarity.
This is only in items of litigation.
I know, but this section is unique to Bothell.
Well,
no other jurisdiction has this language, and so I think it's appropriate to discuss it.
That doesn't mean that others aren't looking at it going, wow, they're cutting edge, and maybe we should do that. So, but again, it's on litigation matters, and so what I might recommend is maybe the city attorney could take this and try and clean this language up a little bit to capture Councilmember Sandberg's concerns a little.
I'd like to ask a question of Councilmember Sandberg, though, before that. Do you believe it would be a violation of either our existing protocol manual or of what the protocol manual you would like to create if a member of council had an email communication with a opposite party in a legal matter for the city of Bothell on a private email that wasn't disclosed? Do you think that would be a violation?
Yeah, I think it would be a violation of just the Public Records Act.
So it would be a violation of the Public Records Act. Do you think it would be a violation of the Ethics Code to have a direct communication that wasn't on putting aside the public records issue, which I agree with you on, by the way? Would that be a violation of the Ethics Ordinance?
If the city was involved in litigation and the council member had communicated with the opposing party in that litigation, yes.
You think that would be you think that would be a violation of our existing protocol manual as well as what you would like to have protected in this protocol manual?
Yes.
Okay, thank
But
you.
I also want to be able to protect a minority's ability to express a dissenting opinion. And it seems as though this section goes beyond just disclosure of confidential information in jeopardizing a city's position in a litigation matter to in
other parts of here, you have the ability to have a dissenting opinion. This is narrowly focused to litigation matters.
And litigation matters, and any vote
That, as a
on-
result of the litigation matters.
voting on action. And so this came up just 2 weeks ago when we were considering whether or not to appeal the Growth Management Hearings Board decision. And because Councilmember Rayum had stated in a Facebook posting, I'm reiterating a position I took previously, he was advised that he needed to recuse himself. And
But
so
Councilmember
when
Semper-
you look at, so I'm wondering, was that advice based on this language? Because
Councilmember Simber, the question I just asked you, the hypothetical I just asked you, applies to Councilmember Rayum. The hypothetical that I just asked you about in terms of that directly applies to Councilmember Rayum.
We're getting off task here. So, City Attorney, could you try to maybe massage this and try and capture both sides a bit, if you could?
Well, I hesitate to take on that task without more direction, because as drafted, I've drafted it as clearly as I felt like I was able to do.
I would say that if you come back and say, this is the best I got, I'm happy with that. So,
I mean, the problem is if I start trying to define actively, if you start trying to define actively supports, it is by nature going to throw a lot of caveats and more. I feel like it would put more a higher lack of clarity in to add various caveats than it is to just take the dictionary definition of actively support. The idea is, as you've pointed out, is that this applies to litigation settings. It specifically says that. And I just, from an attorney, litigation attorney standpoint, I want to reiterate for council, once council has made that corporate, and you are a corporate body, by the way, once you make that decision to take a position as a body, you are all bound by that decision, and it is absolutely crippling to the city's position to have council members who then continue to work on their own to attempt to undermine that position, and it's unfortunate that nobody likes to lose and on a vote, but once that decision comes, from my standpoint, as trying to do the will of the body. I really hope that I can, through all this, if nothing else comes out of this, I hope I can imprint on everybody the need that we have for the body to act as a whole once that decision is made. And it's really the time for politics, and the time for promoting a position is past at that point. It's now time to pull together and make sure we get the best possible outcome for the city. And that's really what this is aimed at doing.
I agree with you fully. I guess when I'm
happy-
looking,
I'm
maybe
happy-
maybe you could tweak to make sure that it's just very explicit. This is for litigation matters only.
Yeah, well, it does
I don't know
say
if you
that.
can make it. I don't know if you can make it more firm or anything, but that's kind of where
I will take a look at it and report back on my thoughts further at the next time you take this up on that issue.
Thank you. So, Councilmember Sandberg, do you have anything else?
And so on page 49, which is the section on the ethics officer, I noticed that this is different than the Bellevue Code, and this code language is very similar to the Bellevue Code. And Bellevue is a city manager form of government as well, isn't it? Yes. Okay. So in the Bellevue Code, it says the city council will interview and choose the ethics officer. Such selection shall be by unanimous vote. And in our code, it says the city manager will choose the ethics officer. And so I would like the code to reflect Bellevue's code. that the Bellevue Code reads, the city council creates the position of ethics officer. The city council will interview and choose the ethics officer who shall operate under contract. Such selection shall be by unanimous vote, and then the ethics officer shall be admitted to the practice of law and shall have sufficient experience and training, which is the same language that we have.
City Attorney.
I just want to explain, and certainly it's up to council how you go forward with this. I want to explain the thought process behind structuring it this way. It is difficult for the council to act directly on its own without reference to staff support or a process to get to where they need to go. So in almost every situation where you're appointing somebody, where the council is appointing somebody in state law, in city code, in every situation, this is generally the process that is followed, whereby the city manager identifies a viable candidate and brings that forward to council, and council ratifies that decision. It leaves ultimate authority in the council's hands to accept or reject a candidate. Again, we're looking for professionals, so we want to vet for professional qualifications first and foremost, and we want to make sure that somebody meets the requirements. The city manager and, quite frankly, staff working for the city manager, myself included, are probably in a better position to go through that process and narrow down to the most qualified individual. But ultimately, you would still in this process retain the decision to the ability to make that decision. So it was crafted to streamline the process, to try to get you to your ultimate goal with a less fuss and less expense, not to cut the council out of any kind of decision-making process. Council still ultimately has that.
City Attorney, and it's a question. I know that as a council, we have one employee, and that's the city manager, and the city manager hires all others. Is that codified, and would we have to change our code to reflect what Councilmember Sandberg is suggesting?
I'd have to look at that issue. Before I just gave you an off-the-cuff answer, what I would say, what I off-the-cuff can say to that is that it is the as drafted. It's the way that other positions are generally appointed for the city. It's the process that we follow in almost every situation, every situation I can think of. Even to your judge is brought to you by your city manager.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
But the judge is brought to us by the city manager, but the ethics officer has a very direct impact on the conduct of council members, whereas other positions in the city do not. And so I thought it was interesting that Bellevue feels that process works for them. And I guess I'd like to know from maybe your colleagues at the City of Bellevue if the council interview process was onerous or problematic.
Can I ask a clarifying question on that? I mean, it would seem that the argument for having less city, if it is a body that's governing the city council's behavior, was part of your thought process that you want to have the city council have less direct control over that individual? I mean, if there's a distance,
yeah,
that you're not hiring your own policeman essentially to look at your own behavior, rather than directly that you have some distance between the regulator and the regulated.
And that is also an element of this. You're trying to isolate, if council has direct control over their own, that point I think is valid, and that was part of the reason for choosing this process, to insulate that person a little bit more from that direct control by the people that he would be sort of overseeing the actions of. So.
And then the next departure from Bellevue's code.
And again, I want to point out this is not Bellevue's code. This has elements of Bellevue's code in it, but if you try to follow it word for word, it's not going to work that way. I tried to draft something that works for the city of Bothell specifically, not a copy of Bellevue's code. So.
Okay, I didn't mean to say that you were copying from Bellevue's code. It was just one of the codes that you had given to us as
Yes.
Comparable language. So, so we have a pretty extensive complaint procedure. But enforcement. I guess enforcement is what struck me. And the thing that struck me in enforcement is that there is a provision in here where deliberations by the council could be held in executive session. And I think that if there is a concern in the violation of the ethics code, regarding one of our behaviors or actions, I think the last thing we want to do is discuss things in executive session, because that doesn't contribute to the public's trust. And it also doesn't give the person who is charged with the ethics violation maybe an adequate means to defend him or herself. So can you speak to that?
Yes.
Stu?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm sorry, this is on page 52, and it is section B3. B3.
On page 52?
So there's three, item number
Third paragraph
3,
from the top.
city council action.
So it is a existing exemption from the allowed for, or an existing reason to go into executive session is to discuss the complaint against an official. So currently, if there's a complaint against one of the council members, it's a valid basis to go into executive session under state law to discuss the complaint against that council member. The exception to that is if the council member says, I don't want to have this discussed in executive session, I want to have it done out in the public. Then they have the right to demand that official has the right to demand that the discussion of that complaint be held in open public session. So this is really a recognition of state law, and almost it basically parrots state law and follows that process in state law. It doesn't mean ultimately no final decision can be made. So the action will take place in open session no matter what. But the discussion of a complaint of a city official under state law currently is allowed to take place in executive session. And just so you know, the concept behind that is so that people feel free to speak freely and get everything out on the table, instead of pulling their punches, as might happen in some jurisdictions in open session.
And then section 4, it says, so this is on the section of actions taken, and it says, the action of the city council shall be final and not subject to further review or appeal, except as otherwise provided by law. So if a council, and then I would imagine that it would just be a majority decision to take some action on a ethics complaint. Is it just a majority of council, or does it have to be a unanimous decision? And so then if the council makes this decision that another council member violated the ethics code, that means that council member has no access to appeal?
The decision, it is a majority of council that makes the decision. There may be ways to appeal under state law. Once this process is all said and done, there probably is. But the way it's drafted is to leave that question to state law. we don't need to get into some sort of specific appeals, because you've gone through the process by that point. You've gone through a process where it's been touched by a hearing or by the ethics officer, and it's already sort of been through an initial review and then a secondary review by the council. So you've basically, once the council's made its decision, you're on your appeal. That is your appeal. So there's no higher body in the city for us to send it to. Once council's heard it, we don't have anybody else to send it up to. So all that's left is to act under state law, and that's what the provision provides for.
Okay, so going back to the issue of executive session, so in Bellevue's code, it says if the final decision of the ethics officer contains a determination of violations, then the council may take remedial action or sanction that council member. And then it says if no appeal is filed in Superior Court. So in the Bellevue's code, there's some provision for appeal. And then the other thing is that the Bellevue's code says such determination shall be adopted at an open public meeting by a majority vote of those officials who are not respondents to the complaint. But just because it says that, you're saying that the state law would still allow them to go in executive session, or?
Not to make the final decision, to consider the complaint and to receive information and to discuss the complaint, but final action and reasons for final action must be given in open session.
Councilmember Sandberg, how many more questions do you have? We're 17 minutes over our budget allotment on this. We've been on this for 47 minutes, and we still have other business to conduct.
Well, then I'll yield the floor.
Councilmember Ram?
So on page 48 under nepotism, it has in here that, hold on, I gotta get to the right page. It says that relatives cannot serve on boards or commissions. And what I was curious of is, I recall, and I'm sorry if I don't recall this correctly, but I believe other ethics codes for other cities also expanded that to people who have business relationships with council members. Do you recall seeing that in other city?
I don't recall seeing that in any other city codes.
I think it was Kirkland or Bellevue. I can't remember which one, but
Well, it's possible I missed it, but I just don't remember seeing that. I guess I would be surprised, but maybe that's a possibility.
because it seems to me that nepotism, if you had a subordinate or an employee that was on a board or commission, that'd be a whole lot different than, say, your wife was on a board or commission. I mean, my wife tells me how things are plenty of the time where if it was a subordinate of mine, I think they would have a hard time not taking my direction. So,
Well, can I respond to that? Just give you a point of view on that. Nepotism in the law is defined as granting favors or preference to others who are in a position by relationship to you by reason of blood or marital relationship. So there's a definition for nepotism out there. So even if you were going to want to put restrictions on employees or that sort of thing, just as a point of reference, I'd want to put it in something called something else other than nepotism, just to avoid confusion, number one. And then the other thing I would raise with regard to employees is a lot of the problem with including employees in something like this is then you've just basically somebody has to choose if they want to get involved in city government. They have to choose between being their job and being publicly involved. And we've with the concept of nepotism, we've accepted that for family members. But as a society, we don't generally accept that you either have to choose between your job or being on a board or a commission or being a member of council. And so I think you want to be, my suggestion is that you might want to think about, do you really want to restrict the ability of people who need their job but also want to be involved on a board or a commission of the city? and maybe there's a reason for not going down that road.
I guess my concern would be if you had a business relationship with somebody and they were on a board or commission and you had a certain opinion about how something should go down, the ways a code should be crafted, or whether or not a property should be sold or whatever, and that person that's on a board or commission has an ability to be influenced by you whether or not you're going to support it. I see that as a huge issue in our society, not this council specifically, but just in general. I mean, that's kind of how you get stuck in trouble with decisions being made to help out your buddy or whatever, or if you have a business relationship and you got $20,000 to gain off it, or 3% of the sale of the property, and so you hang in there for the thing to move forward. Or it just seems to be the crux of ethics to me, that you would try to avoid that as a city government. So maybe I guess I assumed nepotism meant something different than what you defined it as legally. But I would see that as expanding it to business relationships. I think would be important. I'll look through the codes. I know there was this, I believe it was Kirkland's, but I'll look it up. So back to the earlier thing, and I'll make this quick.
Where are you going?
Page 44, section B, we've talked about for a long time already. Because this was enacted upon me 2 weeks ago, I did look for outside counsel, and there's a couple things about it that are pretty specific. One of them, it says must recuse themselves and not participate in any vote. So I don't like it. It shouldn't say must. I think the verbiage is really strong when it hits you and you have it read to you and you hear that. You really think, oh, I really need to recuse myself. And in the case that it was used 2 weeks ago upon me, I posted a comment on Facebook on something that was decided upon, and I didn't think we were going to meet again, so I didn't see any problem with saying, I was happy with the outcome of the Growth Management Hearings Board decision. So this language, to me, I think is wrong. I don't think it should be in here. I don't think it should be written this way. I think it can be misused. There was no communication or like playing on both sides of the fence or anything in my case. And this was actually pulled out of the protocol manual. This is the verbatim what's in there now, and it was used against me. And I'm telling you that upset me probably more than anything else that I've done on this council in 4 years. To have basically my United States Constitution amendment or constitutional rights violated by something that I simply said. I think it's wrong. So I don't know how you want to fix it. I don't care if we take it out of here, but I am very uncomfortable with it saying must recuse. The other piece to this section B that I think is wrong is number 3. It says council members shall voluntarily recuse themselves and choose not to participate under the conditions listed above. Oh, I'm sorry, it says shall, yeah. Again, that's pretty strongly worded. From what I understand from the legal advice I got from MRSC, there is actually no case in which you are required to recuse yourself as a council member. Whether you have a conflict of interest or not, it just simply doesn't matter. You are not required to recuse yourself in any case. So to have language in our protocol that, a new council member coming in to read this, they would think, well, geez, I really need to recuse myself, and I really need to be careful about what I say, is muzzling, and I don't think it's correct. And then the last part too, that I did get outside counsel on is that the whole council may vote to sanction and remove a challenged council member from further participation. I was advised that that's against the Constitution of the state of Washington. Is that correct?
I will just say this: I respect the people at MRSC very much, and I respect the attorneys the attorney that you spoke with, and I've spoken with him. He and I have a difference of opinion. Sometimes legal minds differ.
So I just, to me, this whole section of language really, it's almost like a scare tactic in which you can't freely communicate your opinion. You feel like you could be threatened to be voted to recuse yourself, and it really kind of undermines really our position as elected officials. I mean, there's a lady in the south end of the country right now that's refusing to give out any marriage licenses because she doesn't agree with her religious beliefs, and they've talked about it on the national scale that basically there's nothing you can do about it. She's appointed. She can say whatever she wants. She can do whatever she wants. And then for us to have stuff like this about, you posted on Facebook that you thought a decision that was made by the Growth Management Hearings Board is, in conflict with what the majority of the council thinks, I think is just completely 180 degrees from the facts of the matter. We can say whatever we want, and I will say whatever I want from now on. Of course, I don't want to put the city in a situation in a litigation matter that would cause the city more expense, but that's not what I did. At least that's not what I felt like I did. And so I'll leave it at that, but I don't like this whole section. If you want me to try to write verbiage up for it, that's fine. I don't think it should be shall anything when it comes to recusing yourself.
Councilmember Evans.
I had many of the sections that we've discussed underlined in my report also. It's been interesting to hear the discussion. I'm not sure that I have anything to add to the discussion. I've heard both sides. It's to me, it's a very detailed policy. I think the city attorney started off in the beginning saying that, some of this we can make mandatory, and some of it's aspirational. I think we've got some mandatory conditions in here. Andy just made reference to one, and then we got some things in here. It's difficult to define everything that I think the council discussion has gone over. As I look at the policy, it seems very involved and detailed to me. The ethics officer, I guess it looks like we're estimating a budget of approximately $10,000 annually for this position. Hopefully that's enough. In some situations it may not be enough, but I guess that's an estimate at this point. We don't have that position, so we don't know what that's going to be. I would hope we could resolve these issues without having to go to that ethics officer, but I'm in support of that. I think that's a good fallback to have. Whether you like the fact that the ethics officer shall act as legal counsel for the city under the direction of the city attorney for administrative purposes. The city attorney works for the city manager. I mean, it's you can go round and around on this, but the fact is that's at least my understanding of the government process that we have. We have an executive of the city, and that's a city manager. That's a form of government. I think somebody mentioned that we only hire one employee in the city, and that's the city manager. So it makes sense for me for this, the way this is written, and that it's got to go through somebody. I guess the thing that disturbs me a little bit, or that maybe I'm not hearing this correct, but it seems to me that some people may feel there's a distrust in the city manager or the staff in some cases. And I hope I'm reading that wrong, because I really hope that's not the case. If we can't trust our city employees to administer these things fairly, then we're in a sad situation. So I'm fine with the way that this is laid out. If there's some tweaks we can do to make it better, I think the question was, do we? I think the attempt was to broaden the scope of this to cover more area, not maybe to squeeze it down. So I think we do have a very broad policy. I think it's very, very detailed. I have a lot of things circled in here, questions in my own mind, but I think overall the policy that I reviewed here in detail, I think is a good policy at this point. If we can make it better, I'm all for that too. So, let me see if there's any actual take place in the public. I think there's been a lot of clarification of things here that have been the city attorneys clarified for us, which have been good. So I'm fine.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'll put my 2 cents worth in. It's a, in many cases, it's, this could be a document that you got to be careful what you ask for, because you just might get it. And and that just happens in life in general. I know I asked for something, regret it because I got it. And so, but there's a lot in here, and I honestly, there's more we got to cover. We're going to need another study session, because we need to know, is this going to be codified? Is this going to be part of the protocol manual or an extension of it? We got to come up with $10,000. So we've got, as council, we got more work on this, and I guess so. This needs to come back. And we need to provide guidance, and we need to talk about this more and provide guidance on those things. As far as the document itself, one of the things that I think working with staff, council can give a bit of the history, and like the G, the one that's right out of the protocol manual, having a footnote as to, footnotes in certain areas as to give the historical background on it, so that those that come in, if we adopt this, those that come in behind us, they can understand the intent. As a consideration, we may or may not want to do it. I don't know, but that would be my 2 cents worth. But I do know that we're not done with this. There's more work that has to be done. We have to decide, make those decisions. Is this going to be an extension of our protocol manual? Will it be part, or will it be codified? Are we going to craft this in such a way that we have an ethics officer or we don't have an ethics officer? So those decisions, we got to sit down and hammer this out. And there's 2 other council members, unfortunately they couldn't be here, that I respect their opinions and their views, and just like I respect all of your opinions and views. I'm taking them all under consideration, but yeah, we have more work to do on this. So if the rest of council's okay with bringing this back for another study session, then I think that would be appropriate. And it looks like I see a bunch of nodding heads, so we'll get that on the projected agenda there, City Manager. Councilmember Lamb is requesting to be excused for the balance of the evening, and you are excused, sir.
Thanks.
All right. Being done with that and direction, we have AB 15-125, request for storage space for Veterans Heritage Museum, and we have Assistant City Manager Peter Troedson.
This will be much shorter. The council has received a request and discussed quite a bit recently, request for storage space for museum property for the Veterans Heritage Museum. In your agenda, Bill, I try to describe what I had found in my research, and the Municipal Research and Services Center has provided a good synopsis of the applicable law. And if you don't mind, I'll read a little bit to you. Local governments are often asked to use their funds, property, or borrowing power to subsidize or assist endeavors by individuals or private organizations, such as the construction or operation of recreational facilities, economic development, tourist promotion, and other civic or charitable works. However, the Washington State Supreme Court has long held that no matter how public the purpose may be, it may not be accomplished by public gifts or loans to private persons or organizations except certain aid to the poor or infirm. And they go on to state that the Supreme Court has also found that some expenditures for economic development that are made, and they cite a whole history of changes, that the characterization of a program as a public purpose may not justify a gift or loan of credit to a private entity for that purpose. And again, it's except in aid of the poor or infirm. I also did a survey of our departments that might have some space, might conceivably have space that we could use, but there is no space available that's not already being used for operations, administration, storage, or is planned for that in the near future. So with that, I'll close and subject to your questions.
Anybody have any questions? Councilmember Sandberg.
So I had emailed Joe earlier today because your citation says that public funds cannot be used for recognized city service. And right now the Veterans Museum is not a city service or a city program. And so then I asked the question, well, then how does one become a city service or a program? And what that process entails. And so I was wondering if you or the city attorney could elaborate on that.
I would think that you would have to give some direction that you wanted it to be a program and then budget the money for it and give that direction to staff. But I'd defer to Joe.
Well, there's no set process, but I think Peter's hit it on the head. You have to adopt whatever codes are necessary. Council has to decide that it's going to be a city, this is a business the city's going to get into. It has to be something that the city is allowed to do under the law. And there has to be whatever codes adopted and funds allocated and budgeted for and found, and then staff directed on how to proceed. So it's, that's generally the framework.
And then the Bothell Historical Museum is not a recognized city service or program, but it does occupy space on publicly owned property. So is there a lease arrangement?
Yes,
between the?
Yes, there's a lease arrangement with them.
And what is the cost on that lease arrangement?
I think it's a nominal fee, isn't it?
It's a process for it's a services a lease, and the consideration is services, and they have an obligation to seek certain grants to improve the property and do certain upgrades and things to the property. So there's consideration. It's not, I don't know that we've ever received an actual check or anything from them, but it is fashioned as a contract with a lease with contract obligations and consideration. That is a recognized, if you read MRSC's publications and recommendations on the say and what cities do, that is from time to time something that cities do to in a situation like that.
And so so it sounds like something like that could work in the situation for the Veterans Museum, although we're not talking about a permanent location for the Veterans Museum right now. We're just talking about storage space. So there could be some contract that would involve a nominal fee for the storage of their collection.
You'd have to have, and forgive me for jumping in here, but you'd have to have a service or some consideration. It's not just a nominal fee doesn't get us there. It's not that we have a lease for a nominal fee with the Bothell Historical Museum. We have a contract for services. So there would have to be there has to be something you can point to that say the city is getting something in return for providing that space. And if you could do that, then we certainly could do that.
They pay for the upkeep of the building and the utilities, and then they display the artifacts they have.
And provide staffing, and I mean, it's, there's a whole list of obligations things that they do in exchange for that space.
And then just in terms of finding space in the city, the last time I checked, it seemed like our existing City Hall and Dawson Building facilities are less than 20,000 square feet.
That is true. The Dawson Building is being sold, so whatever space you might lease, if you were to actually receive some sort of service back, would be short-term, and it'll likely be under purchase and sale agreement, so I don't really think that that's really a viable option. There is certainly additional space in the City Hall that we have programmed in for future staff that are not yet at the city because annexations or organic growth has not occurred, but I think it's good to remember that the request for storage is really a subset of the initial request from the Veterans Museum, which is for the city to take over that program, to provide the staff, to hire the curators, to pay for all expenses associated with that program, of which the council would need to do. If you wanted to make this a service, the way I would sort of evaluate it would be, first, is it a priority for you? Second, where are you going to get the funding? Are you going to create a new source of funding, or are you going to eliminate something that you existing provide today? And if so, then storage becomes an issue I think you should discuss. But simply providing storage for anyone who might request it on a temporary basis doesn't seem to fit. I'm not really sure how you even create an argument or create a basis for lending the city's facilities, even if you had the ability to do so. And what would you get in return for that in terms of a service? Mm-hmm. It's a very difficult argument to make.
So I think the service that this community gets in return for providing the storage space is the potential to keep a significant collection in the community.
That's not something you can quantify, though, in terms of state law and providing without violating the gift of public funds.
But we could designate it as a city service or program. So if we designate it as a city service or program, then we could dedicate public funds, in this case 12 by 12 space for the storage. And yes, Mr. Crooks has come before this council and asked the council to consider taking on the administration of the Veterans Museum, but he is also investigating other private avenues to fund and operate the museum. However, he won't have the opportunity to operate this museum if his collection has to be spread out, has to essentially be given away. And so what I see council's role is, if we were to designate this a city service or program, it would be essentially no cost. I don't think we need to commit to providing a permanent space. I think if we can commit to providing storage space till such time as private investment can be identified, either through people giving money or donating time to access grant funds. I think.
Councilmember Sandberg, I want to pose a hypothetical to you.
Mm-hmm.
If there's a gentleman that has collected what I would call fairly significant historical memorabilia of the city, and if he needed to store this stuff, once we do this for the military museum, do we do it for that guy? Then do we do it for somebody? We have to draw the line somewhere, and it's one thing if we were operating the museum and there was a storage component to it, but just to have it into storage, I think we're crossing over a line that we can't defend.
I think that, yes, we do open ourselves up to other very deserving organizations asking for city assistance. And the council, we have to weigh, what public support is for any of these deserving causes. And we have received a lot of public input supporting us preserving in any way that we can the concept of this Veterans Museum. And I know that the immediate need is just to provide storage space. And I know that they are working behind the scenes to get private investment. But if we don't take action of some sort, and I think we can do this and not dedicate any real amount of money in the budget to do so. I think if we take action to just provide storage, then that could provide a catalyst for their future efforts. And if we don't, we lose this asset. I mean, this is I think it's an important asset, and it's an important asset for the same reasons why we have a Bothell Historical Museum. And it's an asset to our community as an economic draw. And I see a vehicle for doing this. And I just want to know, is there council support for that?
I have to ask. I'd like to ask a question, and to anybody that may or may not know, including staff. Does Mr. Crooks have any other locations that could provide the storage also, or to run the museum? Is there anybody out there that he's?
At the last meeting, I gave Todd some clippings out of the newspaper of several veterans organizations and things that, to me, seems like a good place. I know a lot of those veterans organizations are struggling, but they may have facilities that are not in full use, that maybe they have a place to store it temporarily. I was up at the Evergreen State Fair this last week, and there was a display up there from the Flying Heritage Collection Museum. And I talked to those people briefly and explained what we were hoping to find someplace to store some of these things or display them. And they did give me information and said, that's something we could certainly talk to the individual and see. So they have quite a large hangar up there at Snohomish County Field. It seems like it would fit in fairly well with that. That's aircraft related, but it's memorial, a lot of information, and some of the things that went on the ground were supported by the air, whatever the case may be. So anyway, I have this information to give to him. The person he needs to call is Liz there at that organization. If you see Todd, you can give him that. So that's just one. I guess by storing it, what is the incentive to keep looking? And I've been to his house. He has his garage is full of this stuff. His house is full of this stuff. He really has a lot of things to store. It's stored right now in his house. So I guess what he's hoping to do is move it out of there and store it someplace else. Or maybe he has other things. I don't know.
I think he has other things because he
Yeah.
indicated to me that the lease for a storage unit was up.
Yeah.
It was ending in November.
So he has some stuff in a storage unit also. Okay, I didn't see.
But he did convey that it would be stored. What he had could be stored in a 12 by 12 space.
I don't feel that there's a justification for this type of activity in the city. Not that there's not interest by some, but I just think that financially there's other things we need to be doing. This may not cost a lot of money right now. I'm concerned what's the incentive to keep looking if he gets it stored, where does it go from there? I right now couldn't support a program of a historical museum for these types of things. I don't think it was, the impression I got, and I may be wrong, was that it wasn't heavily attended when it was in Seattle. I don't know what their attendance was, but So I just don't see the community clamoring for this type of thing. We've had a few people come in and speak of interest, past history where they've had people involved, and it's important to them. But I don't think there's a huge demand for this right now. It doesn't mean that it's not important, but I'm trying to look at what the existing programs are that we have and the things that we need to support now. So I'm willing to continue to work. I'm continually asking people for space for him looking for this. This was the last one that I came up with. So, but I'm concerned that storing it temporarily in the city is what is temporarily? Is that a 1 month, 6 month, 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, or when he finds something? So I don't know what that is, so.
The reason why I asked the questions, and I don't know where, I can't recall where I heard it, but I thought I'd heard that he had an offer down around Chehalis or Centralia or something, but to actually put it out on display and operate a museum, and that he turned it down because he wanted it to be here. And so, like I say, I thought I had heard that somewhere, and that's why I asked just to see if anybody else had heard that.
Well, that was mentioned at the last meeting, that there was an opportunity that he could have moved those items, or maybe that still exists, to move those items to Chehalis, as I recall. But certainly the focus was to try to keep these items closer to Bothell.
And I've
But
never
we'd have
been
to
able
confirm
to
that with Mr. Cooks.
find the tie to Bothell. There's a big, what, I haven't been able to connect the dots as to what the tie to Bothell is.
Well, I don't want to hash this all back again, but he had that page handout where he displayed about all the reasons why a veterans museum would be good for Bothell. And it was a laundry list of things from, honoring service and educating students and our citizens to becoming, a destination and a tourism draw and driving economic development. So, he had a whole page of what I felt were convincing arguments of why Bothell. And I believe those statements, and I think that this would be a terrific asset to keep in Bothell.
Any further discussion? You've been awfully quiet. Come on, jump on out there.
So I feel the same way. I haven't seen. I would like to see what we're talking about. I haven't even seen what we're talking about. But just the idea of it's good. I have some concern about somebody else's property being stored on our property. It'd be one thing if he gave us all this stuff. I don't know if we can even do that. Can he give us his collection?
He could. The bigger issue is, would you accept it, and what would you do with it?
Right. Okay, but we could. It's not illegal for us to accept.
No, we can accept a donation of property and then choose to utilize it in a museum or.
Okay. So, I guess I need to talk to him. I don't really know what the situation is with his space, and I don't have a problem with it being on display in Bothell, or I actually think it's a pretty neat thing, at least from what they've communicated and what he had in the storefront on Main Street, the antique store he had there. I thought what he had there was pretty cool. But I do have a lot of concern about the city taking on people's. So, what if the building burns down? That we've got when we have somebody's private stuff in our building. I guess, but is he renting it, or is it? Is there a rental agreement? So I don't mind trying to make space for him to store the stuff, but there's got to be a game plan. I would rather it be our stuff if in that case, and so we got to talk seriously about what we're gonna do with the stuff once we got it. If it's just a stopgap measure so the public can try to gain a location and support for it and try to find a way to finance it. Because I agree with you. I don't think that, if you look at the list of things that we are staring down and need to fund, I have to be honest with you, the Veterans Museum isn't really high up on my list of things that are critical to the city's functions. So, but I also think it's a neat thing. I just if we can provide the space for them and they're figuring something out, and we can get an agreement or whatever in place and get some space for it. I'm not opposed to that at all. I think it'd be okay. It just seems odd to me that, like, you know, if I had a car I needed to store somewhere, would I be able to go stash it in the city's garage? You know, I a room in my own house. No, that's all I had to say.
All right, so we need to give some direction here, or is there, or Councilmember Sandberg, are you going to continue discussion with him and see what, and come back, or?
I will continue to work with Mr. Crooks, and I will report back anything that I hear, if there's any positive changes.
Okay, then what we'll do is we will wait to get a report back from you. And if you would like to have it be on the agenda, just let the city manager know in advance. Okay, we have agenda item 15-126, discussion regarding the City Hall dedication plaque, and we got the city manager for.
I don't have a presentation. I don't have a presentation. This matter was requested by Councilmember Sandberg to have a discussion with council, and I don't have a recommendation at this point, but I may, depending upon the discussion.
All right. Well, Councilmember Sandberg.
Thank you. So back in June, I contacted the city manager and asked, knowing that there would be a dedication plaque made for the City Hall, I asked that my name not be included on the dedication plaque. I think that's consistent with the position that I have taken since the beginning regarding the construction of City Hall. And at the time, the city manager reluctantly agreed to my request, and then informed me last week that that in fact he had changed his position, and that my name would appear on the City Hall dedication plaque, citing protocol manual regarding the council speaking as a corporate voice. And so I am before you to ask that you acknowledge my request and my right to free speech and my desire to not have my name on that City Hall plaque honored. And so I'm asking, it seems to me like my only avenue is to ask my fellow colleagues to honor my request. I don't feel, I mean, as we've discussed earlier tonight, that corporate clause applies to matters of litigation. This is not a matter of litigation. It's not crippling to the city's position. It doesn't in any way jeopardize the city's position. And ironically, I bet you no one will ever look at that dedication plaque. But it is important to me that I be able to exercise my right to free speech and not have my name listed. And so I'm asking concurrence of the rest of the council members.
No, and just to provide some additional information as to why I had informed Councilmember Sandberg of my decision. And I think it's true that she did ask me to remove her name. I'm not sure if it was in response to an email I sent out to all council asking all of you how you'd like your names displayed in a dedication plaque, or if it came prior to that. But nonetheless, I did initially acquiesce to her request, but then I told her last week that I had reconsidered that based on an email that I'd sent to her. And if I could, I'd just like to read that email, only because it provides some additional, at least rationale from my perspective of why I made the decision I did. As it reads, The purpose of this email is to revisit the issue of the City Hall dedication plaque. As you might imagine, it is traditional and common practice to have a dedication plaque, which includes the names of all incumbent council members when the building is dedicated and occupied. This fact is true regardless of how each council member voted on the issue. The same is true in a number of city documents, such as the city's budget, which includes the names of all council members, not just those who actually supported or opposed the actual policy document. Much of the City Council's protocol manual is based on the premise and value of corporate decision-making rather than individual directives, including the names of all council members on a dedication plaque is consistent with this practice. And so again, the dedication plaque would have the names of all 7 council members or all council members who were occupying the council member seat at the time that the building is dedicated and occupied. It would also include the key staff, as well as the architect, the developer, and the contractor on that plaque.
All right. Thank you, City Manager. Thank you, Councilmember Sandberg. Is there any discussion?
A dedicatory plaque is a standard item on public buildings, public facilities, parks, trails, city halls, recreation centers. I mean, that's pretty standard. And it usually includes, as the city manager said, the city council, the mayor, the contractor. It's just a standard plaque. You'll see on fire stations, it's pretty standard. So I appreciate Councilmember Sandberg's question about that. I guess the question is it just this issue, or will it be other issues in the future that you may not agree with? I mean, which I guess you have your constitutional rights on whatever it is, but I wish it would have been a unanimous vote. I wish it would, on support of the facilities we do, but I learned, I think at my first council meeting, that not very many things are unanimous on this council. But yet we make decisions and we try to move the city forward, and I think we do it as a body, hopefully, but I think it's a very standard item that goes on a public facility, whatever it is that's being constructed. So, and normally it includes those people that were involved in the council and that type of thing. So I understand she wants her free speech rights here, or constitutional rights to withhold her name from that. So I guess my question is, do you think that would happen again in the future? Would you want your name withheld on other facilities?
No.
Potentially.
Just the City Hall.
Just the City Hall. And why is that? Well, never mind. I'm not going to ask that question.
Councilmember Ray.
So I wasn't in favor of the City Hall either, but it is a common practice to put a plaque on the wall, and it has all the council members on it. So I didn't have the same reaction that Councilmember Sandberg has had to having her name written on the plaque. But I do support her. I mean, if she doesn't want her name on it, I guess I don't have any issue with her name not being on it. But again, I had the same opinion she did. I just consider it to be part of the common practice of when you build a building, or I think the budget's another good example. My name's all over all sorts of stuff in the city at this point, and did I agree with all of it? No, but it is kind of what it is. But again, I support her. If she doesn't want her name on it, then I would hate to have to. Why force the issue? I guess So that's what I have to say about it.
All right. It is tradition, and that's something that that's going away in a lot of places is tradition. It is as was mentioned, it is the corporate voice, if you will, or the corporate practice to list on all works of the city council, be it a document or a capital facility, to have the council that was in office as part of that document or that facility. It the one thing I did learn when I got on the council was I have fewer rights than the people sitting in the audience. And there's certain expectations that the public has of our council members. And I personally think that having your name, whether you agreed with it or not, on all products of the city is what you signed up for when you got on the council. And that's just me. And right now we're at a 2-2, and it is what it is, and I appreciate and I understand where you're coming from, but this is part of what we all signed up for when we ran for office.
I didn't sign up for losing my right to free speech.
We're not taking public comment tonight. Sorry. If this could be, I've got nothing else. So, unless there's something else, so we're adjourned.
If we're so important, why didn't